Number 10. See you later, alligator. A Florida man was arrested and charged with assault with a deadly weapon after allegedly throwing a 4-foot alligator through a fast food chain's drive-thru window. Joshua James threw a live alligator that he had stolen through a Palm Beach Wendy's. Let me guess, Josh. The froster machine was down, huh? Yeah, I've heard it too. He was also charged with illegally possessing an alligator. Do you have a license for this thing? Yeah? Do you mind if I— Jesus! Okay. James then drove his pickup truck to the window at about 1:20 a.m. and after being handed his drink, he tossed the alligator inside and sped off. In James's court appearance, he was banned from all Wendy's restaurants and to avoid possessing animals aside from his own dog and to undergo a mental health test. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty healthy punishment. You know how many Wendy's this guy's got to drive past every day? Just the smell of the fries alone? That's a life sentence right there.
Number 9. Penguin heist. Okay, back in 2012, the world did not end, thankfully. Kyle covered that in our last video. If you missed it, go check it out. But in 2012, 2 Welsh tourists got themselves a court date. Yeah, they had this bright idea. Here we go. They had a few cold ones and thought it was a bright idea to steal a penguin from SeaWorld, Australia. Look, I'm not a fan of SeaWorld as well. They suck, but don't steal a penguin. Just watch Happy Feet 1 or 2 and call it a day. That's it. Just look, but don't touch. Penguin that almost got stolen, his name was Dirk. Yeah, you never guessed that one, did you? The guilty are Rhys Owen Jones, 21, and Carrie Mules, 20. They were both fined $1,000 and Dirk was safely returned with no harm being done. No harm, no Dirk done foul. Here we go. We grew up watching Free Willy, but Free Dirk? That sounds like a movement. That's wild. I'm on board. Let's do it.
Number 8. Tie the knot. A woman and 3 men have been arrested after a huge fight broke out in a pizza shop, apparently over a wrong order of cheesy garlic knots. Hey, that'll do it. If you haven't been in a physical altercation over garlic knots, you're not eating garlic knots right. A woman apparently went crazy in a rage when a Palm Coast pizzeria put cheese on her garlic knots. Hey look, I hate cheese too, I get it. I'll say it. Her friends then joined in on the mayhem, destroying the pizzeria. Flying tubs of Parmesan cheese, fax machines thrown, cash registers ripped out of the wall. These people were pissed. Witnesses who had their dinners spoiled by the fight saw this and knew the people apparently, and were all charged with burglary and criminal mischief. I mean, I understand. That's all I'm saying. I understand. I get hangry. There's been some chairs thrown. Taylor knows.
Oh yeah, cereal buddy, Fruit Loops? All I'm saying is I'm the Cinnamon Toast Kid, Kyle's the Fruit Loops. That's it. You go on this side of the table, I go on that. Also Red Milk. Number 7, Donald Pugh. Where to start here? Okay, I included a random assortment of awful people on this list. This story I had to share. Donald Pugh, here we go. He was suspected of arson and vandalism. So police in Ohio put out a photo of his face. They asked locals to step in and get this man caught. Get this criminal off the streets. This was back in 2016. The photo that was issued to the public was this one here. But Donald wasn't a fan, right? So he sent the police a better photo of himself for them to use. Yeah, he sent them this one. Look, Donald, the photo admittedly is much better. Okay, facial hair, you're all cleaned up, the shades are solid. That's a great addition. Really adds the criminal to your eyes. Plus, you know, gotta protect your eyesight whilst you commit arson. Gotta watch for those flames. Smart moves. Awesome. The police department got the pic, just a selfie, along with one message. The message said, "Here's a better photo. That one is terrible." Nice. Keeping it nice and short so we don't have to open the message. I like that. Surprisingly, Donald was immediately caught, and Ohio police even reached out and said, "Thanks to the power of social media and tips called into authorities, we have learned that Donald Chip Pugh has been arrested in Florida." Of course it's Florida. It's always Florida. What's up with that?
Number 6. Candyman. 2 Brooklyn men were awarded $33,000 in court over a humiliating arrest made by police officers in Coney Island in 2014. The men were arrested due to the illegal possession and distribution of although it was nothing more than a bag of hard candy Jolly Ranchers. The officers arrested the men outside of the candy store, strip searched them, and the candy was taken in as evidence. Ha! Could have fooled me with the candy store right there. The undercover cop said, I quote, "He thought it was the stuff from Breaking Bad." Like, how is this dude a cop? Yeah, you seen Breaking Bad? Yeah, just go do that. Okay, cool. Like, who hired this man? The men then sued the police department. Yeah, no sh**. It's candy. I'm in a candy store. The men were held then for 3 days. Imagine, 3 days being locked up with murderers and you're in on tooth decay. Also, how long does it take to see if it's candy or not? Just pop it in your mouth in the cruiser. It's raspberry. They're good. Let them off.
Number 5, thigh or leg. Ever sit down at the holiday dinner table and your uncle's cutting the turkey and says, "Are you a thigh man or are you a leg man?" Except he says the same thing every Christmas, and you can't wait for him to say it because that means you're another second closer to not being there. Anxiety's a heck of a thing, man. I don't have anxiety that bad. I'm just trying to relate to some of the people out there. I feel like I've been there with you. I don't know. Well, this was no Christmas, and this certainly was no turkey, but people we're talking about here. Yeah, we're talking about people. When someone was found to have done a serious enough crime, but not serious enough to be unalived, the authorities met in the middle by taking a leg. Oh, God, that's awful. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I guess it's not that bad. You lose a leg and you move on, but imagine being held down and someone hacking your leg off with a bronze tool because steel doesn't exist yet. Oh, awful, awful, no good, no painkillers. Number 4, homework. Homework, homework, homework. Homework. Love it or hate it. Well, I actually hate it, and so did most of my friends. Some say it's needed in a modern world to teach efficiently, some argue it doesn't do anything at all. I did my homework 90% of the time, believe it or not, and I know some of you are going to comment and say, "Oh, Chetty, no you didn't." I did, I really did. But when I didn't, I would usually come in and charm my way out of it. "Hi, Miss Middleton, you look great today. You're the best." It worked most of the time. What can I say? Usually on the female teachers, it didn't work on the male teachers though. But the worst that would happen is that I would lose a percent off my grade here or there, but I just make it up back on the test, no problem. Well, scribes in ancient Egypt weren't so lucky. They were very important as they were literally the writers of the time. They described the history. It's pretty cool actually. However, if they chose to stay up all night and play Call of Duty like I did, well, their punishment was a more of the violent physical variety and not so much the stern talking to or "I'm going to phone your mother" variety. My mom didn't care. Number 3, caning. Another creative punishment for crimes was caning of the feet, which is actually arguably the worst thing on this list. Since, you know, we use feet every time we walk or do something, you're gonna need spa treatment after this one. A very simple process. The person is strapped down, feet exposed. A governing official then takes as many lashes to the feet as required. Painful, humiliating, and possibly dangerous. Cuts could lead to infection as we're walking around in heat, sweat, and, well, some folks, if you were poor enough, just didn't have shoes. The worst I ever got was a couple minutes in the timeout corner, except that my mom felt bad because I looked really cute and I was sad, and everything was fine. No spanking required. I was a good boy, I promise. There's some people don't think I was a good boy, but I really was a good boy. Number 2, barbecue. I feel like the moment humans discovered fire, well, that fire hurts, we wanted to throw everything in it and see what happens. Now, I jokingly call this segment barbecue, but that's because it's really horrible. Famously, a group of rebels in ancient Egypt were immolated after trying to overthrow the pharaoh, where after the barbecue from hell had finished, the pharaoh used these rebels as human torches. Oh wow, okay. All Fantastic Four jokes aside, it was horrible, smelly, and cruel. Don't ever do this, please. Number 1, adultery. Surprisingly, one of the most punishable crimes in ancient Egypt was being unfaithful, partly related to the lifestyle of Mahat and being truthful and just. It really makes sense. Just be a good boy. It makes a lot of sense, but some people don't follow that. The whole thing is bizarre because, well, no one really followed it. Especially the royals. I mean, they had kids with their sisters and brothers and cousins and others and all, it's messy. However, some folks did find themselves caught in this law, and when they did, they could succumb to anything on this list. For women, it was most likely the torch. For men, it was impalement and then being tossed into the river because, you know. Better keep those love notes to yourself, folks. Not worth getting burned over. It's not worth it. Just keep it to yourself.
Number 10. Man eats underwear to avoid breathalyzer. In Alberta, Canada, there was a man in 1985 by the name of David Zerfleur. He was pulled over by an RCMP officer for weaving on a snowy road after apparently drinking one night. He then decided to run from police after being pulled over on foot. It's literally every cop's dream. They're just sitting there, "Please run, please run, yes!" Of course they caught him and booked him for what intended on being an impaired driving charge. Whilst in the back of the cruiser, of course, David ripped the crotch out of his underwear to eat it. Couple things here. How do you even get that down? I can't swallow a Tylenol without choking. Apparently he didn't eat it. He spat it out after a while and was just kind of chewing on it. His theory was that the cotton might absorb the alcohol content before he got to the station to do a proper test. Which, when he got there, he was acquitted of all charges and blew a legal, respectful .8. He did it. I mean, first off, dick move for driving though, that's not cool. Very dangerous and very selfish. Best part comes weeks later at his hearing. Just so happened a group of grade 11 and 12 law students watching the hearing as a class. Just, teenagers giggling the entire time. Of course they were teenagers. Order, order! Did you stuff your own tidy whities into your mouth? Objection, Your Honor, leading the witness.
Number 9. Spider hostage. Look, I don't like spiders. This next guy on our list doesn't even respect spiders, okay? Paul Brian Smith, the man who has 3 first names. Back in 2012, Paul agreed to watch a friend's pet spider, which on paper at first I'm like, hey, gross, but I get it, that's awesome. A little bit of Home Alone vibes going on there. When the friend came to collect said furry friend, Paul held the spider ransom. Said if he didn't get $100, he'd swat the spider. He swat the spider. Sounds like a Spider-Man villain there. Like J. Jonah Jameson. Gonna swat the spider. In turn, Paul received 40 months in prison for burglary, theft, possession of drug paraphernalia, and more. Yeah, there may or may not have also been a person hiding in the closet when cops came around. This one's really bizarre. Can't really talk about the weird, awful extra details on this case. Paul Brian Smith, give it a lookie once you're done here. Also, save the spiders, they're good.
Number 8. A bath salts Christmas. An Ohio Christmas miracle. Sounds like a Christian rock group. A man by the name of Terry Trent was charged with breaking and entering a home at Christmas when he was arrested very high on little more than just Christmas spirit. The family arrived home and saw the man sitting on their couch watching some Christmas shows. While Dad's on the phone with police, the man apologized, thanked them for his stay, and calmly left. Family said that the man apologized after lighting a candle, fixing up their wreath, relaxing on the couch, and finishing up the last Christmas tree decorations. Ah, the spirit of Christmas. Guy's the opposite to the Grinch. Dude, this guy's the real Santa Claus. I hope you're all good. He's coming in to do his check-ins. Police arrived and said Terry didn't cause any problems, went in with them calmly and quietly. See, guy just needed some Christmas company. Wanted to catch Mr. Bean's Christmas special. Who wouldn't? That could have been really, really bad and turned out to be a zombie apocalypse Christmas dinner, but thankfully it did not. Also, it's Christmas. I've seen my aunts after some wine. It's pretty well the same thing, isn't it?
Number 7. Photobomb. I love a good photobomb. I dug this one out of the archives. This is from 6 years ago at a bar. I'm a big fan of ruining a beautiful moment between 2 other friends. Friends? These are my friends. Sometimes photos catch great moments. Sometimes they catch not so smooth criminals as well. Back in October 2010, a Wisconsin man got caught trying to steal a tourist bag. This guy was caught in 4K. While he was stealing the bag, the owners of said bag were taking a selfie a few meters away. He's in the background taking the bag, just clear as day. It's so funny. He immediately was sentenced to 5 days in jail, obviously. The 69-year-old man's name is Glenn Lambright. Pretty ironic last name, seeing how easily he was caught. Mr. Lambright was also fined $500. Guy just gets caught in a boomerang.
Number 6. Dances with lions. 32-year-old Maya Autry of Bronx, New York was caught on camera at the Bronx Zoo apparently taunting and dancing in the lions exhibit with a lion. She apparently calls herself the Lion Queen, and she has been seen on camera not once, but twice, dangerously close to these cats inside the lions exhibit. She's lucky that this thing is tranked out of its mind, just chillin', bored. People will do anything nowadays for the gram. She's throws some cash, threw a dozen red roses, and danced for the lion. You know, dinner and a show. The lion has been praying for a day where someone gets this bold. Apparently she gotten herself into the exhibit before and was handed a citation prior and a year ban before returning again. 2 counts of criminal trespassing. The video is great too. The lion's just sitting there. He's like, so you coming in or not? You just gonna stand there? Hey, you know the score of the Knicks game? No? Alright.
Number 5, flaying. This is straight up a crime, man. I don't care what you say. This is just a crime against humanity. I'm not here debating on how governments get rid of their, let's say, more interesting members of society, but this is not it. Popular in the ancient world for whatever reason, and I can't stress this enough, I would faint from watching. I was shivering writing this. Seriously, it's the worst. This is the act where someone is skinned alive. They're held down and peeled back like a potato. There's multiple famous incidents like in art and mythology. I just don't know who sits there in one day and goes, you know what, this guy, we gotta skin this guy. Let's just skin him. Let's cut them up. Let's go. Number 4, the eagle dropping turtle. Okay, here we are. Top of the food chain. We're in charge. I'd like to make the argument it's not the things we eat that puts us there, but it's the things we don't eat. Think of all the animals at your favorite local Chinese buffet. Well, we as humans have adapted so much that we can survive and choose not to be carnivores or eat certain animals. Where am I going with this? Well, despite us being number 1, sometimes the animal kingdom fights back. That's kind of how it works. Take Aeschylus in 455 BC, for example, a philosopher who found himself being struck by an eagle dropping a turtle onto his head. Unfortunately, the injury was fatal. Since we're talking about Greeks and philosophy, let's bring in a little law here. This is good, you'll like this. Mens rea, actus rea. While the eagle certainly didn't know he was committing a crime, he still did do it. Sounds like someone needs to go to animal court. That's something they would probably do back then. I mean, they did in medieval times. They put animals on court, so why not back then? Number 3, Draco. No, not Malfoy. Not Draco Malfoy. I know you're all thinking it. That's what I thought too. Draco, the lawgiver of ancient Greece, was a man with modern solutions for their modern problems. He was asked to give a code of law to replace the very aged tribal feuding laws that still existed at the time. Commoners were shocked to find out that even trivial crimes could wind you up in the brazen bull, or not breathing anymore. However, the wealthy, of course, loved these laws and applauded Draco. Classic villain story. They really loved it, so much so that it was Draco's undoing. As the legend goes, Draco was buried in a small mountain of clothes, hats, and garments. He suffocated under the pile of compliments. The accidental fatality of the man who gave us strict laws that are fatal. So what do you charge? You get in trouble for undoing the guy that's supposed to undo? That's weird. I don't know. Number 2, Prometheus. Oh, mighty Prometheus, what wise knowledge of fire do you bring us today? The story of Prometheus is that of a very dark and tragic one. He was the god who gave humans fire, despite Zeus's wishes not to. Well, given Zeus's temper, he wasn't too pleased when he saw people grilling up their Slovaki. Love me some Slovaki, man. Naturally, Prometheus had to pay, so Zeus did something so awful to him, well, we still talk about it today. He had Prometheus chained to a rock where every day at the same time a large bird would come down and eat his innards. Just come and just nom nom on his insides. Gross. Since he was a god, he had Wolverine-like healing abilities, but he wasn't immune to pain. It would still hurt. He'd heal every day, but it would hurt really, really bad. Number 1, Sisyphus. I think this one is relatable to everyone, including myself. Unless, of course, a large bird does rip your guts out from time to time, or you've been skinned alive, then that one's more relatable. I doubt that, though. Sisyphus was the king of Corinth and had cheated his meeting with the Grim Reaper one too many times. This made Zeus mad. So he sent in Sisyphus to push a boulder up a mountain forever. Every time he gets to the top, it just falls back down. And if that's not a metaphor for life, I don't know what is.
Kicking off our list at number 10, vending machine killer. Okay, right off the hop, we have to know that apparently there are a lot of vending machines in Japan. Like it's something around 1 for every 23 people. So yeah, that's a lot of snacks. So in 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 people who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. Now, when the string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So around the time of this entire ordeal, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave a free drink with every purchase made from, you guessed it, a vending machine. One of the many vending machines in Japan. So when people didn't want their free drink, they would just leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful instead of throwing it in the garbage. But on the other hand, there's some people who are not nice or thoughtful and rather horrible. And it turns out someone was taking these drinks and lacing them with poison and then leaving them back on top of the machines for some random stranger to come around, drink it, and then be sick or pass away. Like those numbers that I mentioned earlier. It's almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this because, well, you have to narrow down where the person picked up the drink, and that's pretty impossible seeing as in 1985 there weren't nearly as many CCTV cameras as there are today, or vending machines apparently for that matter. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for a mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. Number 9, Jacek Jaworek. Now, this is a man who was on the run because of horrible crimes that he committed in July of last year, so a little more recent than the 80s. He took the lives of 3 people who were a part of his own family. One of the family members was able to escape this horrific nightmare and was able to make it safely to the neighbor's house where they could call the authorities for help. But since these horrific crimes took place, he has gone missing and no one is sure of his whereabouts. Right now, it's speculated that he likely escaped from Poland where the crimes took place, but his exact whereabouts still remain quite the mystery. He could be literally anywhere, which is terrifying. Number 8, John Pyle. This human is a pile of garbage. This horrible human is not an undercover spy or an insane fraudster. He's just a monster who committed certain specific crimes that are unfortunately a little more common than any of us would like to know. Because of the nature of his crimes, I can't really talk about them here in this video because let's just say they're that brutal. But let's just say that he's definitely one of the worst kind of criminals out there. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to these crimes. Now, the amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence that they found during said search, he was charged with 30 different second-degree felonies alone off just that one search, which could bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. Now, he was arrested the same day, but he posted a bail bond of $90,000 as well as surrendering his passport. Now, fast forward to 16 months, October 23rd, 2017, and of course this guy does not show up for his hearing. And thus we have a fugitive now on the run. Number 7. The Beer Man. He took the lives of at least 6 people in Mumbai, India between October 2006 and January of 2007. It's not a lot of time at all. That's a lot of people in a very short amount of time. The reason this unidentified monster is called the Beer Man, such an odd nickname, is due to one fact about each crime scene, which ended up being how they linked these crimes together in the first place. This was the presence of beer bottles that were found scattered next to each of the bodies that were found. Now, of course, it's been over a decade since the crimes were committed, so it's definitely upsetting that this person has yet to have been caught, obviously. But it's been a while, so maybe they're naturally gone. You know what I'm saying? Number 6, the Honolulu Killer. This is another one of those horrible, horrifying, unidentified serial killers who was active in and around Honolulu, Hawaii. Now, these crimes took place in 1985 and 1986, and throughout those years, it's said that whoever is responsible for these crimes took the lives of at least 5 women. These women seemingly didn't have any connection to each other as they were all from different walks of life, but because of the gruesome similarities between each of them, authorities were able to determine that they were likely committed by the same horrible person. Despite the years that it's been, the perpetrator has never been identified and could still be out there somewhere hiding from taking responsibility for their actions. Number 5, Ted Bundy. One of the most famous killers of all time. Ted Bundy killed upwards of 30 people during his crime spree back in the 1970s. Now, most interviews with Ted are extremely well known and they're horrible, but there's one interview that's very disturbing that's not as popular as the others. In this interview, he's talking about taking the life of a student, Georgianne Hawkins. The chilling part of it is how he talks about these dark matters just so matter-of-factly, like it's a casual conversation between work friends. Like it's not him describing the most horrible acts ever committed.
She had a Spanish test the next day and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor me for a Spanish test. It's kind of odd.
Now, of course, over on Netflix, you can pick a number of installments involving Ted Bundy. There's Conversations with a Killer, there's a movie with Zac Efron. Choose your fate. Either way, the story that you're going to hear is chilling, so you've been warned. Number 4, The Staircase. The Staircase is a classic true crime staple, one of the most widely debated cases ever, as a matter of fact. Back in 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead in her home. Now, this docuseries follows the investigation, a few theories surrounding the case and the trial, but Kathleen was found at the bottom of the stairs of her home, and it's horrible, it's sad, it's tragic. And while it was originally regarded as fatal, but an accidental fall that caused her passing, as the investigation unfolds, the truth gets a little more murky. Kathleen's husband, Michael, had always been somewhere near the top of the suspect list onto what happened here, considering that 1, he was the last one to see her alive, and 2, was actually home and supposedly in the backyard when this fall occurred. So yeah, definitely a suspect for sure. We're gonna ask some questions. There's crazy theories surrounding this death. There's theories of Michael's infidelities all the way to a barn owl. There's a lot of speculation about this case, and this documentary is one you want to watch if you're a true crime lover. You're not really sure what to think afterwards, so comment down below. It's like this is chilling. This is a really chilling case. Number 3, Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is known as the Night Stalker, with of course a documentary under the same name. All these horrible people have documentaries. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles back in the 1980s. He was known for invading homes, which actually initially made him dubbed as the Walk-In Killer. But he had another signature that was concerning to many people, especially during the height of the Satanic Panic. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Imagine walking in on that, that's terrifying. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of the crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, but instead he was just his own kind of monster. It's said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. And during his court appearances, he would also hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." So, yeah, quite horrible, I'd say. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. Okay, this is a 2-for-1, so buckle up. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her twisted husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped, then they later killed 10 victims. It really was the most twisted situation. Disgusting, awful people. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to and receives 16 years. Gerald was waiting for execution, but he actually died of cancer before meeting that demise. So, yeah, I guess nature helped out with that one. Charlene, on the other hand, she got out. She actually moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. You can sleep on that. Could be living on your street, who knows. And finally, number 1, don't f with cats. Okay, when I say this is one of the most captivating documentaries I've ever seen, I mean it, okay? I was late to the party for this one. I watched it way long after it was released, but from the moment I started it, I could not stop. This documentary follows the story of the killing of Lynn Junn, which is one of Canada's most infamous crimes ever. I wanted to end on it because, of course, I'm a Canadian. I saw this on the news when I was in school. Lynn was killed by a man named Luca Magnotta, who was already stirring up some internet buzz because he was posting some pretty horrific videos before this crime even happened. As the name hinted towards, he was with cats. That's all I can say. It's horrible. The documentary follows a couple of unbelievable cyber sleuths who saw Luca's messed up videos with the cats and who were intent on finding out who he was and where he was before this killing happened. They knew it was going to get worse, so they tried to track him down, and I'm not going to spoil the rest, but yeah, it's unbelievable. The crimes themselves are absolutely horrible. The story is almost unbelievable also, but the work that these cyber I already said that, whatever. The documentary really has it all if you're a true crime person. It really is hard to watch because of how tragic it is and the situations are dark, but again, the ending is worth it. It's definitely worth the watch, especially if you don't know the full story. They get them. Spoilers, they get them.
Number 10, grave robbing. Probably the most infamous crime of the time and today, really. The ancient Egyptians were many things, and that included vain. There's a reason why they got Elizabeth Taylor to play Cleopatra. It all makes sense. The pharaohs of Egypt were buried with immeasurable amounts of treasures, gold, gems, jewels, swords, cats, dogs, just about everything but the kitchen sink. Once the tombs were sealed, the treasure was also sealed in there forever, or so they thought. That wasn't until some crafty thieves broke into the tombs and slipped away with the loot. When a lot of Egypt was being discovered in the 1920s, it was unsure if the loot had been taken 10 years ago or 1,000 years ago. There's not really a way to know. And yes, it still happens to this day, and yes, it's awful. Leave it in there, it belongs to them, please. No looting, don't go looting, please. Number 9, bribery. Given that Egypt was one of the greatest civilizations the ancient world ever saw, it makes sense that they had it all. Currency, law, order. However, sometimes these things just don't mix. Ever seen Better Call Saul? Yeah, exactly. They had a good system for the time, and it was fairly concrete. However, like concrete, over time, there's little tiny cracks that form, aka bribery. Oftentimes when facing serious charges against the pharaoh, there was an option to opt out of your sentence. Just open your wallet and dish out some cash. This has worked in ancient Egypt, medieval Europe, 1920s America, and today. Say what you will, but the almighty dollar does have buying power. Number 8. Unaliving. If women of the evening partake in the world's oldest profession every night, then unaliving is the second thing we ever did. It's not really a profession, but we've been doing it for a long time. It's pretty sad, but it's true. Sure, it's always been frowned upon, but today we have a lot of rules, laws, and regulations regarding said rules, laws, and regulations about unaliving. It's bad, don't do it. It was unfortunately more common than we think back in the day, especially amongst royals in ancient Egypt frothing at the mouth for the throne. But this is something that could have happened to anyone. Plus, in a time before CSI and guys throwing off their glasses to make very obvious low-hanging fruit jokes, well, if you didn't see the crime, then you probably wouldn't catch the crook, so people kinda just got away with it sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. Number 7, Assassination. Related to my last point, nothing is true, everything is permitted. The creed of the Assassins, and one of my favorite video game franchises, at least up until they did Pirates. After that, I was all kind of downhill after that. Well, despite the inaccuracies of the Assassin's Creed series has, like falling from great heights into bales of hay, the first known assassins just may have started in Rome and Egypt. More likely Egypt than spread to Rome, actually. Like a Sith, a lot of these early assassinations were for revenge, personal ambition, power lust, especially in the pursuit of success. Some were even part of larger plans. Now, it's one thing to be violent, sure, but to organize the destruction of a dynasty through the means of your knife, well, it's amazing what a couple inches of steel can accomplish. Who goes there? Someone's knocking on the door? We're good. Okay, anyway, sorry. Number 6, treason. Law and order in Egypt were associated with something called mahat. I believe that's how you say it, which refers to truth and justice within society. Like I said before, great idea, great start, but more often than not, the ancient Egyptians had to fight off a lot of treason and corruption. More than they like to admit it. Like when King Ramses III chose the heir to his throne, and well, it wasn't who his wife had picked out, so there was going to be problems. There was a lot of wives, sons, and breeding. There's confusing lines. So, in order to get what she wanted, she was going to stab him in the back. Literally. Well, her plot was unfoiled, and her and all the conspirators were immediately unalived as punishment. There wasn't even a burial service, as they were all thrown in the river afterwards. No amount of money or bribery could save them there. Hey. Number 5, Pedro of Castile. Pedro of Castile was doing as the European monarchs do. Sometimes you gotta marry for alliances. Sure, it makes sense. Your kingdom is much less likely to get steamrolled by a larger kingdom if you have an alliance with fellow kingdoms, or the bigger kingdom itself, actually. Pedro of Castile married the young Blanche of Bourbon of France, and so Spain could just be a wee bit more snug, in case the English come over. You gotta be careful. But Pedro just wasn't having it. What he was having instead was a mistress named Maria. So instead of enduring a loveless marriage, he had poor Blanche locked away in a tower, just like Sleeping Beauty. Except a handsome prince was not coming to rescue this damsel in distress, but a man with a black hood and a sharpened axe. You know what I'm talking about. As Pedro had her unalived. I was gonna make a joke about Rapunzel and let down some hair so she could make an escape, but I mean that's just awful, really. Imagine being locked up in a tower for so long. Sure, I love the indoors, but you gotta let me out at some point, Chief. Do you think I get food delivery apps to work up in a tower? Because otherwise you have to let me out, dude. Comic-Con's coming. Anime Convention North's coming, buddy. I gotta go. Gotta get my Naruto on, bro. Come on, man. Number 4, hands-on funeral. This one's just gross. When you're in a relationship, it can provide you with some great things. Someone to go through life with. Companionship. Love. And if you're lucky, someone who's a good cook or a baker. Oh, love me some baked goods. However, also in a relationship, sometimes you do more than that. Sometimes you get a little close under the sheets, if you know what I'm saying. Take King Philip V, for an example, who loved loving his wife so much that he just couldn't help himself, you know? Like, for instance, when his wife tragically passed away, he wanted one last ride. But he penciled in one more trip to Toe Curl City before she was laid to rest. God, that doesn't seem right, you know? That just let her go peacefully, you know? Let her just. Number 3, Lenin. Okay, while not a king in the most stereotypical sense, he did dethrone a king and made himself an autocratic dictator, which is basically a king just modern. Trust me, it is. Yep, trust me. In a nutshell, Lenin had been anti-royal for most of his life, but after some help from some sneaky Germans and other Soviets loyal to his cause, the Tsar had no choice but to abdicate, like I said at the top of the list. He abolished the Tsar's secret police and then put in his own. And had people oppressed, which was one of the main reasons why the whole revolution started in the first place. See what I'm getting at? He was supposed to get rid of the evil monarch, and he became the evil monarch. Well, see, then a civil war broke out, and then he was worried that the exiled Tsar might escape and try to retake the throne, and, well, he had some goons take care of him, and, Well, the family too. You can never be too sure. You gotta take care of everything. You gotta get rid of everybody. You just can't be too sure. Number 2. Pope John XII. For those who aren't very religious like myself, the Pope is the big one. He's next to God, and for a minute there, he was the most powerful man on earth. Seriously, I mean, this guy could crown kings. He's the king of the Vatican and the king of kings in the Holy Scripture. It's kind of serious. And today he's got a really cool car for parades. The Pope-mobile's pretty sick, not gonna lie. However, Pope John XII was anything but a sweet old man who delivers the holy messages from God. This Pope was doing a lot of anti-Pope behavior, if you will. Now, I for one wouldn't care if the man had a girlfriend or a glass of wine. Heck, some rules need to be changed, but this Pope was most known for his lavish, how you say, adult-themed parties, and was known for getting hangovers. It got so bad at one point, it started a war. Number 1, not so slick shady. Marshall Mathers, Eminem, the king of rap, and named king of hip hop by Rolling Stones magazine. Hence he's the king, I gotcha. Despite what you think of the man's lyrics, especially vulgarity, he's an excellent wordsmith and could write rhymes that would leave you tongue twisted. However, I don't think it would come to anyone's surprise that the man's got a few charges under his belt, especially the way he talks about Kim. There's a couple bad things he said about her, I don't know. Back in 2001, arguably the peak of his career, Eminem assaulted somebody in a nightclub after getting fresh with his wife. He got 2 years probation. Maybe he is saying the things he's saying in those songs. Maybe he's telling the truth. I don't know. Number 10, tyrants. This is where the name comes from, folks. So we kind of wouldn't have the label if it weren't for ancient Greeks. There's been a lot of tyrants in history, but this is where it all starts. A tyrant refers to an absolute leader who uses his or her power harshly and crudely, exercising total control and oppressing those who stand against the strict rulings or are a desired target of which. Ooh, very fancy definition, Chetty. I like it. Wow. The trick is seeing how history remembers you. Leaders like Pol Pot and Joseph Stalin are easily agreeable tyrants, but for example, the ancient Greek leader Alexander the Great can also be considered one. History remembers him for his great triumphs, and while that's interesting to look at because, well, he's one of history's greatest generals, he's really amazing actually. From the safety of our history class, that's fine, but his actual deeds, well, they were less than remarkable. War, looting, trading, YouTube's least favorite S word, and well, many more brutal things that the conqueror from another land did. Not good. Plus, if you were from another land and you saw him do what he was doing, you probably wouldn't think he was such a great guy. It wouldn't be Alexander the Great, it'd be Alexander the Big Stinky Tyrant. So, there you go. Number 9, Diogenes. This one's my favorite. Maybe the least famous of all philosophers, but one with a decent philosophy, or at least so I think so. That's how I feel, and I think it fits in with the modern world. A man who was banished and exiled and had all his possessions stripped away. In some depictions, even his clothes. I wouldn't want that taken away. I gotta have my clothes. Thus, the man was forced to live his life on the streets of Athens inside a barrel, as you do. This likely is what developed his philosophy of cynicism. He argued that since he was living free of tax or payment in his barrel, that he was truly free. Thus, he had less worries than the commoners, and yeah, that's where his freedom came from. Well, where does the crime part come in? Besides, well, the obvious tax fraud there, and we're gonna pay your taxes. Diogenes might have been a few gyros short of a picnic, if you know what I'm saying, as he would often shout at passers-by, and well, he would do the devil's bedroom dance solo in public, just in his barrel there, just doing. Yeah, I can't say it, but you know what I'm talking about. Number 8, Sith revenge. Well, I know a lot of people would be behind this, especially for really awful crimes. Revenge is not the Jedi way. Sometimes it was an option for the families of those who were wronged in ancient Greece to enact their revenge on the crook. Assuming, of course, the crook was caught. You can just imagine the kind of crimes, the really bad ones. YouTube won't let me say. However, the important point here is that the families of the victim were given a chance to make their peace, or, well, whatever the antithesis of that is, usually involving the crook not breathing anymore. Kind of a blood for blood kind of thing. Sounds great at first, but I couldn't recommend it. I don't think it would go well in people's conscience. I don't know, not a good idea. Number 7, exile. A classic of the old world. Just like Hellenic society itself, a common punishment for a severe enough crime was banishment. Sure, today there's lots of folks who like being alone. I swear most of the people I went to high school with were introverts. I was friends with all of them. I don't know why though, because I'm so extroverted. For example, Heraclitus of Ephesus. He was getting banished from ancient Greece, and It's a lot different than not being invited to Chad's birthday party. However, getting banished back then could likely see you with nothing, like previously mentioned before. Maybe not as bad or down bad as previously mentioned, like Diogenes, but still pretty rough. There were lots wrong with ancient cities, sure, but you were much safer in civilization than left outside of it back then. As someone who's seen a lot of Bear Grylls, I wouldn't recommend going out of the wild back then. A trip, fall, a cut, that's it. Whew. Number 6, the Brazen Bull. This one is a punishment and a crime. 2 in 1, baby. The Brazen Bull to many may just look like a statue, and worst case Ontario, maybe the horns are sharp and could hurt you. Maybe. But don't be fooled, friends. This is much more than a statue of bronze or brass colored bull. It's actually a perp cooker. It's a twisted, awful, rotten form of punishment that could also be a crime itself. One against humanity, and those are the worst ones. Basically, you open the hatch on the bull and throw your bad guy in. Then, get a nice big fire going, really big one. The same ones your dad does in the summer. You know the ones you can't even get too close to because it's too hot. Woo! Then, wait. Once steam or whatever horrible smelling vapors come through the bull's nose, that's when you know the perp is done and it's time to throw in another one. That's awful. What an awful way to go. Oh.
Number 5, Julia Agrippina, Nero maker. Yes, making Nero should be considered a crime. But honestly, Julia Agrippina of Rome did quite a bit more than just that, and I can see where Nero got it all from. You see, Agrippina wanted to be in power, and when her uncle, Emperor Claudius, separated from his wife due to a scandal, Agrippina saw an opportunity, no matter how messed up it seems to both us and the people of the time. Agrippina seduced her uncle, became his 4th wife, and by extension, became the empress. But it doesn't stop there. She manipulated her uncle husband into making her son Nero heir to the throne and set up a marriage between Nero and her daughter-in-law Octavia. It's even rumored that she poisoned the food that ended her husband's life, allowing Nero to rise to power, which really bit her in the butt when Nero had her assassinated. What is this crazy family? Good God. Number 4, Queen Theodora. Queen Theodora was scandalous before she even became queen. She was involved in theater from a young age, and one of her most well-known character portrayals involved her stripping down to next to nothingness. But her acting career slowed right down when she met and married Justinian I, who was the heir to the throne of the Byzantine Empire. The two of them were as thick as thieves and ruled together, but that doesn't mean she didn't have a knack for dispatching of those who threatened her position. She was scandalous, but she did way more good than she did bad. She set up houses for ladies of the night, worked for women's marriage and dowry rights, and banished brothel keepers from the Byzantine Empire. She was also a huge supporter of monophysitism. I hope I said that right. She's even considered a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church of the modern day. Killing it, Theo. That's kind of a bad joke, actually. Number 3, the Great She-Wolf of France. Queen Isabella of France started off her queen life married to Edward II of England, who preferred the company of men to his own wife. This is obviously a precarious and possibly extremely frustrating situation to find oneself in, but she kept it bottled up and even gave birth to a son, Edward III. Until it all came to a head when her husband found a new favorite. She visited France and had an affair with Lord Roger Mortimer, an exile from England. But the better twist came when Isabella, alongside Mortimer and a mercenary army, invaded England, took the throne, and she became queen regent for her son Edward III until he came into power. She also was probably responsible for the dispatching of her husband Edward II while he was captured. Eventually her son would come into power, and she was imprisoned for 2 years before being allowed to live a quieter life in retirement. Number 2. Queen Fredegund. I was constantly double-taking almost the entire time I was reading about this woman. She was crazy ruthless, and all seemingly for the betterment of both her bloodline and the Merovingian kingdom. She became queen in the 5th century, marrying King Chilperic, and organizing the death of Queen Galswintha and sending Queen Odovera to a convent. When Brunhild, a big enemy for the king, and sister of the late queen, swore vengeance on them, Fredegund brutally destroyed Brunhild's husband and sisters, destroying them as in that kind of thing. The queen also made sure that all of the other heirs to the throne stopped breathing, making it a sure thing that her bloodline would occupy the Merovingian throne. Her son, Clotaire II, was only a baby when the king met his end in 587, so, of course, this ambitious queen rose up to power, fighting battles, quelling rebellions, and ensuring the smooth running of the Merovingian kingdom in her role as queen regent. She met her end in 597, 10 years after her husband, but Clotaire II continued in his mom's footsteps, having Brunhild and all her descendants removed from existence, resulting in 20 years of peace. So it's good. Number 1. Cleopatra. A list of scandalous queens would not be complete without one of the most well-known and famous rulers in history. Cleopatra VII Philopator was the last pharaoh Egypt ever had, reigning from 51 to 30 BC. Her life was full of scandal. When she first came into power, she was co-ruler with her husband and brother, Ptolemy XIII. But that didn't last very long, as the two did not see eye to eye, and it started a huge civil war in the country. At the same time, a conflict from Rome made its way to Egypt as well, resulting in Julius Caesar allegedly being seduced by Cleopatra and helping her end her brother's life. And again, being co-ruler with another of her brothers, also named Ptolemy, and ending the life of one of her sisters. She was also having an affair with Caesar and even produced a son with him, who became co-ruler with her after Caesar's death and after her other brother was seemingly assassinated. I'm so glad I was not a part of these families. Just death and betrayal everywhere. She then went on to seduce second Roman triumvirate member Mark Antony and sided with him when Octavian and Mark Antony engaged in the final war of the Roman Republic, which Antony lost, fighting with and alongside him until she poisoned herself to avoid being paraded through Rome and executed by the victorious Octavian.
Number 10. George Chapman. Starting off with George Chapman, we're going back to the late 1800s for this piece of work right here. He began his career at first as a Polish doctor, but in 1888 he moved to London, and that's when things got a little more dicey. Once in London, Chapman sought out 4 mistresses. Not 3, not 2, not a side thing, not 4. Let's do 4 at the same time. George Chapman was a doctor, a cheater, and a killer. He poisoned all 4 of these women with arsenic. It was terrible. Chapman himself was executed for these crimes in 1903, but we're still talking about them because this guy was so bad they thought perhaps he might have been Jack the Ripper, but that's since been proven otherwise, so yeah. Imagine someone being so bad, they're like, maybe he was Jack the Ripper, maybe he was just another horrible individual, who knows. Number 9. Arnie Cheyenne Johnston. Okay, this was the famous Devil Made Me Do It case. If you've watched the new Conjuring sequel with the same title, this should all ring a familiar bell. Well, it's based of course on a true story, all that's real. Back in 1981 in Brookfield, Connecticut, Arnie was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and the victim was his landlord, Alan Bono. Now, prior to this, about 2 months prior, the Glatzel family witnessed their son David host a demon. Right? David was behaving strangely, the family was confident this was the work from the devil, so they called in the pros. They called in Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now this was a process that lasted days, and witnesses say that the demon that fled out of the body of David was the same that took over Arnie a few months later. The same demon that made him attack his landlord. Yeah, Arnie was convicted and he served 5 years out of a 10 to 20 year sentence. Yeah, he was released on good behavior. Number 8. Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, or the Moon Maniac, or even the Boogeyman himself. It's clear that Albert was a terrible human who did terrible things. I can't really talk about some of the stuff, but yeah, given those nicknames, you can piece it together. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing, and then doing other things with these people. Horrible. But the horror was not over at that point. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, the actual number of casualties was closer to 100. And he even claimed that he had some in every state. So that's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already terrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He sent a letter detailing everything about how he lured the victim and the rest of the horrific details that occurred afterwards. Number 7. Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, Jeffrey's one of the most well-known serial killers, with his crimes taking place, of course, from 1978 all the way to 1991. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court, some interesting things to say. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he was the devil, which was intended to bolster his insanity plea. Odd take, but sure. Again, the devil made me do it type of bullshit. Now, his attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, dare I say caught up in the character from the movie Exorcist 3. Said character being Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. Number 6. Richard Iceman Kuklinski. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous 5 families in New York City, okay? He had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, that's still a lot, but he had claimed that the actual number was close to 250, so yeah. When we think of what an assassin would look like, he may not be at the top of this list, which may partially be what helped him be so successful in the first place. While he killed his victims in a multitude of horrible ways, he was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies. This was to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death, right, and really figure out who was doing it. Richard ended up passing away in jail in 2006. Yeah, we know the time of death for that one. We know that one very well. The Iceman, check it out, it's on Netflix. It's a good documentary.
Number 5, Bloody Mary. Duh. Mary the First, or Bloody Mary as she is also known, was the first real queen of Britain. But this reign didn't last very long, 5 years to be exact, before she was replaced by the much better Queen Elizabeth. But in that short 5-year span, Bloody Mary earned that title, let me tell you. Mary I ordered war against the Protestants and slew quite a hearty handful of them for heresy. Which is interesting since her father, Henry VIII, was kind of the guy who made Protestants more of a thing in England, and then her sister was also Protestant and made it the main religion in England. History is full of people needlessly passing away because what they believe isn't the right thing. Anyways, to heat things up, Mary even had some of these Protestants burned on the spot. Some is kind of an unfair statement. You see, the Queen here was responsible for burning over 300 Protestants at the stake. Other kings and queens burned people at the stake for their faith. I mean, Mary's father did it, as did her sister. But it's the sheer amount of people that make her much worse and much more famous. Number 4, taking over. Queen Catherine the Great of Russia was obviously a queen of Russia. But that don't mean she was actually Russian. She was actually German-born. But she was Russian to get herself into power when it turns out her husband, Emperor Peter, was not very liked by his own people, as he showed a very obvious dislike for Russia, which is kind of weird. She took advantage of people's disdain, and while she may not have directly done the life ending here, it is pretty well stated that the act was committed by her supporters, and public opinion held her responsible. She was called the Great, but it seems she was actually kind of the absolute worst, even if she was a strong ruler. She does look very proud of herself in a lot of her paintings though, which, I mean, she overthrew her own emperor husband and became ruler of a country she isn't even native to. So like, yeah, I guess, good job, I think. Number 3, La Loca de Loco. Finally, a queen not on this list for ending other people's lives. No, Juana La Loca was far worse than that. Not to be insensitive, but Juana La Loca was loco. She was the Queen of Castile from 1504 to 1516, and she suffered from various mental disorders. After her husband died in 1506, her father buried his body, but that didn't stop La Loca from opening the tomb and caressing her husband's non-living body from time to time. Ultimately, she even ordered people to dig up the body fully, and she would kiss her deceased husband's feet. Sorry, excuse me, I need some water after that. That's disgusting. That's a lot. Oh good, we aren't done. Of course not. No, apparently, Juana would also carry his coffin everywhere with her and even kept it under her bed. It wasn't until years and years later she allowed his burial outside her window, finally. Look, I get loving somebody, but dear lord, imagine what she was like when he was alive. Stage 10 clinger, 100%. Number 2, let them eat cake. How about a queen that caused a whole revolution? That's gotta be a good one. We have almost all heard of Marie Antoinette. She was well known for splurging on things she shouldn't have and the countless affairs and scandals she was involved in. Like the scandal of the necklace. Countess de la Motte pretended to be the queen's friend and entered the French court in 1785. She fooled a member of high society in believing that the queen loved him, even going as far as to hire a lady of the night, disguise her as the queen, and convince the poor guy that Antoinette wanted to purchase a diamond necklace that cost 1,600,000 livres, which is almost $12 million by today's money. The amount of sheer greed and debauchery that happened while she was around made her own people rise up and fight back against the unfairness of the French monarchy. Good job, you made your people hate you, cause y'all ignorant. Number 1. Countess not Dracula? Born in Transylvania, because of course she was, in 1560 Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary was a Hungarian noblewoman. But more than that, she was an extremely infamous serial slayer. She used her position of power to defend herself from ever having to suffer the consequences of the heinous crimes she would commit. Okay, well, name the crimes, Adam. Okay, I will. Elizabeth spent years slaying servants and peasants just because she wanted to and enjoyed it. She did it so much that her own husband, Count Audacity, went so far as to build his wife a torment chamber for her to do this more comfortably. Great husband, horrible person. Elizabeth also had a nasty habit of actually feasting on her prey. She would often bite and eat chunks out of them while they were still alive, and in one case, she may have even forced someone to cook and eat some of their own body. Eventually, her conduct became so appalling that a trial was held. It only took forever to happen. She was convicted on 80 counts, but was only sentenced to solitary imprisonment within her castle. That's it. Like, how is that okay? I don't get it. She thankfully met her end 3 years later in 1614, but my lord was she a bad dudette. Not good.
Number 10, Bonnie and Clyde. They kind of wrote the book on couples doing bad things, where if a bad couple happens to make headlines, they could be described as a real Bonnie and Clyde, a modern Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were as thick as thieves, 2 peas in a pod. Merciless crooks that formed a gang in the early 1930s and wreaked havoc across middle America by robbing banks and exercising their Second Amendment a little too liberally. They were becoming a real thorn in the side for law enforcement. To make matters worse, they were becoming somewhat idolized for their crimes by some of the public. Not good. However, not even a Ford V8 could help them outrun the law for too long, as one day in 1934, it saw the young couple ambushed by agents. And by agents, I mean they turned the car and the crooks into Swiss cheese. A lot of blam blam going on, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't good. Number 9, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. Despite Canada being a majestic land full of moose, mounties, and rivers of maple syrup and politeness, it's not all fine and dandy up here, folks. Nope. We have our fair share of whack jobs too. Take for example Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, a Canadian couple who in the early 90s took part in some heinous crimes, including the delifing of Carla's own sister. Ooh, and maybe even some sexual related crime. It was naughty, it was bad. When it came down to the trial, Paul was going away for a very long time. Nothing was going to change that. However, Carla got the plea deal of a lifetime and got a fraction of the time compared to Paul. However, videotapes found after the case show that Carla was much more involved than previously thought and would have given her a sentence much closer to Bernardo, maybe even the same. She's currently a free woman. Gross. Number 8, Charles Manson. Okay, this one isn't so much a couple as it is like a throuple or like a grouple. Lots of people intertwined. Anyway, just a weird group of hippies. But Charles Manson was involved, romantically speaking, with his family members or cult or whatever you want to call it, rather. You can't get much more scandalous than Manson. The Manson family took refuge at Spawn Ranch, an abandoned ranch that had been used as a film lot in the past, located in sunny California, Los Angeles. The family often experimented with mind-altering substances, the same ones that made the Beatles the Beatles. Unfortunately, it wasn't all fun-loving and vegan commune happiness, brother, at Spawn Ranch, as the family became involved in numerous criminal activities, which eventually involved in the delifing of an up-and-coming movie star, Sharon Tate. You ask your mom and dad about her, they'll tell you, they'll remember. If you've ever seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, then you'd also understand. I try to relate things, make it more relatable for you, but ask your mom and dad, they'll tell you about the 60s. Number 7, Susan and James Carson. Susan and James both had some troubled backgrounds. Can't have a criminal with that one, really. They fell in love and, well, they fell in love with the same illicit substance that made the Rolling Stones, the Rolling Stones. They changed their last name to Bear, and well, it just gets worse after this point. God had written letters to them to do so. Eventually, they declared themselves witch hunters and began a spree of violent crimes. because that's just you. That's what you do. The bodies and evidence kept piling up, and they kept disappearing. A manifesto was eventually found calling for the assassination of then President Ronald Reagan and late-night comedy legend Johnny Carson. No relation. They were sentenced to life and remain suspects in a bunch of unsolved cases. Ooh, I don't like that. That's gross. Number 6, the Rosenbergs. 1950s America. What a beautiful place. Imagine, if you will, you have a suburb with green grass, white picket fences, and a starter home. Dad buries his PTSD from the war and takes out his anger on the family sometimes, even violently. Mom is a stay-at-home mom who's on so many prescriptions she's forced to lay down during the day with a vodka martini just to get her strength back from a headache. Oof. All while under the threat of atomic annihilation. Oh, America the brave, America the beautiful. Except the biggest thing every American feared back then was actually communists. Yeah, I know, right? Who would have thought? Communists coming to take over because they threatened the great American way of life. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg looked just like any other couple you'd find in the suburbs, except they were Soviet spies. Spies that aided a group that was leaking atomic secrets to the Soviets, allowing the Soviets to have a nuclear program years before the Americans suspected them of having one. Both de-lifed by the state after being found guilty. However, Ethel wasn't as guilty as previously thought and could have received a lighter sentence. Oops. Our bad. Oh, she's innocent? You know what I mean? The flip the switch. Oh, dude, I already flipped the switch, dude. Too late.
Number 5, Mr. Smith. Back in 2014, this criminal was caught rather quickly, as most of these are. A bank robber, for one, arrived with a terrible disguise. The guy had sunglasses and socks over his shoes. Yeah, he looked like a stupid mascot with those big sock shoes, you know what I mean? He looked like the M&M. The big, you got it. The cashier didn't give him any money, so the failed robber left empty-handed, thankfully. Thing is, the robber had been to the bank 30 minutes earlier, and he gave the teller his full name and address. Yeah, Dean Smith. He was 27 at the time he got busted in a Welsh village, and he was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars.
Number 4. Smells good. A 91-year-old was charged with smuggling illegal substances into Australia in 2015. Victor Twartz of Sydney could face a life in prison if he's convicted of importing 10 pounds of said stuff into the country on a flight from India. Inside soap. Soap? Soap. Like bars of soap. He told the authorities that when he was about to board his plane to return to Sydney, he was handed a bag that he was told contained gifts for someone in Australia. After he landed at Sydney, of course, a quick search of Twartz's luggage found 27 packages of soap. How smelly is this guy? Which tested positive for not soap. Apparently he didn't know he was a mule, or even know what a mule was. Come on, he's 91. Yeah, when you get to the airport, take this, give it to the boss. Oh, okay. Do you know that I invented chewing gum?
Number 3, the other pocket. Coming from Pontiac, Michigan, Christopher Jansen thought that he had the right of way. He claimed to have been searched unfairly without a warrant. Now, the prosecutor explained, however, that given the fact there was a weapon-sized bulge in Christopher's jacket at the time, it looked like something suspicious, and it turned out it was said thing that was suspicious. Get what I'm saying? In order to prove that this was not the case and that there's no way authorities could have ever known that there was a weapon on him, Christopher handed over the jacket to the judge to see for themselves. Not a bad play. Thing is, if you're gonna do that, make sure there aren't any other illegal substances in the other pocket. Gotta check the front, back, side, and side, my friend, that's it. The judge found it, and the rest is history, obviously. Yeah, I wanted to throw in a more lighter one before we get to our last two, because now it gets a little crazy.
Number 2, grannied. An 11-year-old boy from Ohio was taken into police custody after allegedly punching his grandmother twice in the face at a Dayton toy store when she refused to buy him the toy that he wanted. 60-year-old Barbara Weeks told police that her grandson had punched her in the nose and tried to again before she ran out of the store and away from the boy in fear. Weeks then admitted to police that she was terrified of her own grandson, who was taken to the Montgomery County Juvenile Justice Center and charged with domestic violence. Can you imagine if we tried that with Grandma? Oh. First off, that's your grandmother. You're supposed to love her and eat cookies that she makes for you. Our grandmother would have just RKO'd that kid. You know what I mean? She had picked his head up and walked out of the store nicely with it too.
And number 1, Unlucky Logan. Okay, if you haven't seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, spoiler alert, it's a great time. Gotcha, I'm not gonna spoil this. DiCaprio and Hanks at the top of their game. Young Leo stars as conman Frank Abagnale Jr., who posed as a doctor and a lawyer and a pilot and successfully evaded the FBI. for a bit. Maybe he gets caught, maybe he doesn't, I don't know, I've never seen it. Now in real life, back in 2015, Logan James, who was just 19 years old at the time, tried pulling a young Leo. Except he doesn't have the same look, so it obviously didn't work. James had breached his license conditions after being released from prison on February 6, 2015, so now he was of course getting called back to prison. Can't be doing that. Gwent police took to Facebook to ask locals to help out, but one user in the comments section started getting a lot of upvotes. Why, it was Logan James himself, on his own Facebook, commenting on the Gwent police status. Haha, catch me if you can, won't see me slipping. Over 40 likes on the comment, of course. He then added as well, I've been walking around near home so they're not trying too hard to catch me. James was then caught hours later and the police thanked the public for doing their part. Yeah, thanks Logan, couldn't have done it without you. Literally.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Belle Gunness. Belle Gunness was a Norwegian-American serial killer who is believed to have killed over 40 people, including her own family, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Belle was born in Norway in 1859 and immigrated to the United States in 1881. She settled in Chicago where she married her first husband and started a family. This was all fine and well until things soon took quite the turn. Belle began to collect life insurance policies on her family members, and if you're a true crime fan, you likely know where this is going. She went on to eventually kill them in a fire. She then moved to LaPorte, Indiana, where she purchased a farm and continued to lure wealthy suitors to her property just to kill them for their money and assets. She was known for her physical strength and was able to bury her victims' bodies on her property. Belle's crimes were discovered in 1908 when a fire destroyed her farm and the remains of several of her victims were found. We love when the villain is brought to justice, but unfortunately, that did not happen here. Belle herself was never found, and it is believed that she may have faked her own death and fled the country. In our number 9 spot today, we have Dorothea Puente. You know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, this certainly is a case of that. If you took a glance at Dorothea and knew nothing about her, you'd probably assume she was someone's kind grandma who also had some cookies and a glass of milk waiting, but that could not be any further from the actual truth. In reality, she was actually a serial killer, and she decided to prey upon some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, people who were seeking help and assistance. Dorothea operated a large rooming house that was set in a large Victorian home in Sacramento, California. The residents who would often stay there were people who struggled with different substances such as alcohol, people who had been in mental hospitals, and the elderly. All of these people were receiving social security checks, and if they suddenly vanished, she figured no one would ask. In 1982, they did begin to vanish, but of course their social security checks were continually being cashed. As it turns out, Dorothea was taking their lives and then their money. She has now been called the landlady from hell. In our number 8 spot today, we have Yang Xinhai. You might be familiar with Yang already, as he is quite a notorious name in Chinese criminal history. Also known as the Monster Killer, Yang was a Chinese serial killer who killed at least 67 people between 2000 and 2003. Yang was born in 1968 in the central Chinese province of Henan, and he had a troubled childhood. He began his killing spree in 2000 when he started breaking into houses in rural areas and killing entire families. He targeted mainly farmers and migrant workers who were often living alone in isolated areas. Yang was eventually caught in 2003 after a massive manhunt, and he was found to be suffering from a mental illness. He confessed to his crimes and was sentenced to death in 2004. His execution was carried out in 2004 by firing squad, and his case is considered one of the most heinous and disturbing in Chinese criminal history. In our number 7 spot today, we have Pedro Lopez. Pedro is a man who lived a life committing some of the most horrific crimes I've ever heard of throughout South America in the 1970s. By the time the 1980s rolled around, he made a mistake during one of his awful crimes, and this thankfully led to his arrest. Once in police custody, he began to basically explain his entire life story, and he confessed to an astronomical amount of crimes. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. Pedro, of course, went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994. I'm like, great. just before I was born. Nice. He wasn't just sent home straight away and instead was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years after, but he was also released from there. So aside from the crimes he committed, are you ready for the worst part? In 2002, he was suspected of being the perpetrator of a new crime, but no one has been able to find him since 1998. Yeah, he just disappeared. That's awesome. Love it. In our number 6 spot today, we have another Pedro Rodrigues Filho, also known as the Pedrino Matador. He is a Brazilian serial killer who is believed to have killed over 70 people, mostly other criminals, in the 1960s and 1970s. He did have quite a difficult childhood, as his father was a notorious criminal who actually, really sadly, harmed and killed his mother, so this of course had a profound influence on Pedro and his life. This experience is believed to have contributed to his violent behavior later in his life, and Pedro began his crime spree at a super young age, starting with a horrific crime when he killed the vice mayor of his town, who he believed was responsible for the death of his girlfriend. He continued to kill other criminals, often targeting those who had previously wronged him or his family. Pedro was arrested in 1973 and was eventually convicted of killing 71 people. He is currently serving a prison sentence in Brazil and is known for his outspoken and very unrepentant attitude towards his crimes. While I'm sure we can all feel sympathy for the things Pedro experienced in life, it truly is no excuse for the things that he chose to do.
Number 5, banana theft. Banana thief. Theft? I don't know. Turns out bananas curse people, makes them do crazy things. This next couple is pretty odd. Here we go. Back in 2014, a Connecticut burglar drove his station wagon through the doors of a closed convenience store. He drove literally into a gas station, got out, stole a single banana, they peeled and then ate the fruit, and then fled the scene. That's right, nothing else was taken, no cash. I mean, there's obviously significant damage that has to be taken care of now, but the banana, the lone single banana, why? This isn't Mario Kart. You can't just throw a peel down and then make a getaway. You're gonna get caught. It's 2022, my guy. Keep your bananas safe, folks. These people are sick. For example,
Number 4, fruit fight. Florida resident Philip Joseph Smolsky was charged with assault and battery on his girlfriend for apparently using a banana to throw at her. Police were called on the morning of January 3rd, 2014, and Pasco County deputy noticed a red mark on the victim's head where she said she had been hit by a flying fruit. That's like the start of a Cops episode, you know? Just driving. 42 David, we're actually responding now to a banana in pajamas over on Affidavit Avenue. The arrest affidavit shows that the same deputy also found a banana in a nearby garbage can, and that parts of the peel were found on the ground near where the girlfriend was sitting. A clue. In addition to the domestic battery charges, he was also charged with attempting to resist arrest without violence. How do you resist arrest without violence? Just say no? Like no thank you politely a couple times? No, I'm okay, thank you. Police say that pepper spray then was used to apprehend Smolsky. Ouch. This is just like the origins of a villain story. Oh no! It's Mr. Potassium Man! He's like throwing banana peels. Don't slip. Whip!
Number 3, tattoos tell all. Sometimes you get a tattoo to remember a person, or a place, or a time. Sometimes you get a tattoo of a mountain on your forearm because you like nature and being outside and that one trip that one time. Great, we get it, we love it. Every tattoo is meaningful in some way, sure. Well, thanks to those fond memories being drawn in ink, it was quite easy for California police to find the killer of a victim who had died 4 years prior. This killer, Anthony Garcia, decided to remember this horrible act after doing it by getting a tattoo of all the grim details right there on his chest. Yeah, police noticed the chest tats when taking Garcia's mugshot for another crime, much smaller than, murder, and that's where the tattoo stuck out to the police. They're like, wait a minute, we've been here before. The Christmas lights, the bent street lamp near the liquor store, this was the exact scene where the body was found 4 years prior. There was even a helicopter that looked angry depicting Garcia's nickname, Chopper. Yeah, I have a dragonfly for my mom. Yeah, I don't like needles, it's probably the only one.
Number 2, reverse Santa. The old reverse Santa, huh? The old chimney sweep. Apparently this is way more common than I thought. A Maryland man who was asked to remain anonymous, due to the ongoing case of course, is facing charges in court recently as the police had to respond to 2 calls from the same house. The family apparently heard scuffling and coughing in the middle of the night from behind their fireplace wall, and decided to reach out to authorities. But they were already beat to the chase by the man stuck in their wall. Yeah, I'd stay anonymous too. That's embarrassing. Guys just whispering directions to your house. Yeah, it's Bradshaw? Brad Bradshaw? Bravo? Romeo? Guy had to rat on himself. The fire department showed up, had to rip the wall down brick by brick to get Buddy out. Like, you wasted everyone's time, man. The family's time, the first responders' time, your getaway driver's time. And these guys' mugshots, they're the best. They're always just covered in soot, like a bad Oliver production. I'd do anything!
And finally, number 1. Use current location. Gotta save the most bizarre for last, I guess. Kristen DaCosta from Massachusetts. She's clearly never seen the movie Disturbia. She's sleeping on it. She's sleeping on Shia LaBeouf. Kristen was court-ordered to wear an ankle bracelet as part of her probation, but she luckily didn't know that the bracelet could track your whereabouts. Yeah, what did she think it was doing this whole time? She's like, okay, thanks. That's random. And then just committed crimes? This is why you have to watch Disturbia. Stop sleeping on Shia. Kristen had no clue that it was tracking her while she committed 17 break-ins. Yeah, homes all over southern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Bedford, Fairhaven. I mean, where does she get the energy, you know? Where does she find all that energy? So random. She didn't destroy anything at all. She just stole jewelry and then left. The police just watched her go spot to spot, tracking her down, just ping, 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 awesome, there she is now, great. One owner didn't even realize they'd been robbed. That's how fast Kristen was, so, you know, if only she didn't have that ankle monitor on the entire time, she would've maybe got away with one of the 17 that she tried. I can't hop one fence, let alone 17, that's insane. I'm kind of impressed. Don't do crimes, but that's a little impressive.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Luis Garavito. Luis gained a nickname from the media of the Beast, and I think that's a great indication of the nature of his atrocious crimes. He is said to be one of the worst serial killers in the entire world, and it is believed that his victim count is up in the 300s range, which is absolutely shocking. He confessed to 147 crimes, and he was found guilty on 139 of those counts, which put his sentence at 1,853 years. But here's the thing, this trial took place in Colombia, where he lives, and there is a law, or was a law, which puts the maximum sentence to 30 years. He was sentenced in 1999, meaning there's really only a few years left of this sentence. He also had years taken off of his sentence because he assisted police in the search to recover some of the victims' bodies, which means that just this year, in 2023, he is eligible for parole. Okay, that's great. According to Luis himself, he committed these crimes because he had made a deal with the devil, and he explained that satanic ritual was involved in all of his crimes. In our number 9 spot today, we have William Bonin. This horrible person is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 21 young men in Southern California from May of 1979 to June of 1980. It is said that on at least 12 of these occasions, he was assisted by one of his 4 known accomplices, and it is even speculated that he might be responsible for 15 more of these crimes that evidence hasn't officially been able to connect him to. He was often referred to as the freeway killer because of the fact that most of the bodies were found along the freeway of Southern California. The police surveilled William until they could catch him in the act, which they did. In the beginning, he claimed innocence, but after receiving an impassioned letter from one of the victim's mothers, which asked him to please share the location of her son's body, he confessed his guilt. But he made sure to clarify that it wasn't so the mother could be at peace and her pain could be eased. No, of course not. Instead, he said, quote, "I was dying for a hamburger and I knew if I went out with the cops, they would get me a hamburger." Right, just gonna take a moment and let that sink in. At his first trial, the prosecutor described him as, quote, "the most arch-evil person who ever existed." William was convicted on 14 of his crimes and was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before his sentence was carried out in 1996. In our number 8 spot today, we have Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness where he would then stalk them like prey. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrifying crimes, he was just a soft-spoken baker. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling the streets by night. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was a badass named Cindy Paulson, who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In our number 7 spot today, we have Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki was a woman who worked as a nurse for a number number of years. She first got her nursing license in 1989, but it wasn't until the 2000s when things took a seriously dark turn. Between December of 2000 and February of 2001, the hospital that Vicky was working for recorded a number of deaths that was unusual. It was a much higher amount. Most of these patients were in the age range of 60 to 100 years old. Of course, people just chalked this up to the advanced age of most of these patients, but a rumor began to spread that someone might actually be responsible. After this, the hospital's administrator noticed that a vial of a drug called Mivacron had gone missing. You might see where I'm going with this. As it turns out, the person responsible was Nurse Vicky, and she had at least 10 patients whose lives she took by giving them too much of this missing. It was a muscle relaxant. Take in that this is 10 people between December and February. That is an unbelievable amount of people in a remarkably short amount of time. You might be wondering why she took these lives, and apparently she did it when she found those people rude or quote too demanding. Okay, Vicky, get a different job then. I don't know. In our number 6 spot today, we have Michael Bear Carson and Susan Carson. This couple is not one that anyone would want to encounter. The stories of these two come from the 80s. They were married, and on the outside they appeared just like a happy couple of harmless hippies. We all know, though, not to judge a book by its cover, in the end they would go on to become known as the San Francisco Witch Killers. Didn't know San Francisco held so many witches. Basically, together the pair took the lives of 3 separate people between 1981 and 1983. They started off by killing their roommate, who Susan claimed was a witch, and said that she was stealing her quote health, power, and beauty. They next killed one guy that they worked with on a farm because they said that he was a demon. The final person they took the life of unfortunately picked up the pair as they were hitchhiking, and they took his life because they claimed he was a quote black witch, whatever that means. Essentially, they were just committing crimes against people that they claimed to be witches. The pair were each tried and convicted for each separate crime and are both serving sentences of 75 years to life. Neither of them have ever shown any kind of remorse for what they've done.
Number 5. The Doodler, another stupid nickname for another horrible unidentified killer. He received his nickname due to the fact that he would sketch his victims before taking their lives. Yeah, how sinister is that? You see that on TikTok, but this is like the evil, horrible version of that. This unidentified killer committed their crimes in the San Francisco area from January 1974 to September 1975, and they specifically targeted the gay community. It's believed that 14 deaths can be attributed to this killer, while 3 others were injured in the process. Unfortunately, because of the stigma and the sensitivity surrounding gay men at the time, the 3 who survived this monster's attacks were very reluctant when speaking to authorities for fear of being outed as a result of it. This of course has led to there being very little information for them to work with in terms of, actually identifying the person responsible. But for a while there was a primary suspect, but that person has never been officially charged because sadly none of the survivors felt comfortable enough to testify in court. There's also a very real chance that authorities know who the killer is but just don't have the evidence to prove it in the court of law, which is also a terrifying thought. Number 4. The I-70. This unidentified killer is known to have taken the lives of 6 store clerks in the Midwest back in the spring of 1992. The reason he is referred to as the I-70 killer is because most of the stores were just a few miles off Interstate 70, I-70. While most of his victims were women, there was one man, but it's believed that he may have been expecting a female employee at the time, and that's the only difference there. The killings were clearly the main objective of his crimes as well, considering the fact that each scene there was only a small amount of cash that was actually taken. Aside from these initial 6 crimes, it's thought that he also might be responsible for the deaths of 3 more store clerks in Texas back in 1993 and 1994, as well as 1 more in Indiana in 2001. Number 3. Jason Derek Brown. This piece of work has been missing ever since November 2004. That's quite a long time, but that doesn't mean authorities have given up just yet. Jason fled from Phoenix, Arizona in the year after he allegedly took the life of an armored car guard who was just outside of a movie theater. Now, after committing this already horrific crime, he then took the money and then ran, just to make things even worse. On the FBI website, where it details his crimes as well as other details about him and who to contact with any information, all that good stuff, it gives a little bio on Jason, and it says that he enjoys being the center of attention and that he clearly likes showing off his luxurious lifestyle. Yeah, it's crazy how many of these people are known for trying to flaunt their stolen lifestyle. Another thing the website reminds us is that he should be considered armed and dangerous at all times. Number 2, the River City Ripper. One of the most terrifying things that exists are of course serial killers who are still on the loose, especially when you find out that they've been recently active, right? That's the horrible new news that we don't want to hear. Now this serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, and 3 of which were fatal. These horrific crimes took place between August of 2020 and April of 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and being able to provide a description of the assailant, there's still of course very little to go on in terms of actually being able to identify this horrible human being. The FBI was contacted shortly after the survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created a profile of this unidentified killer. So there's work being done, although there's little evidence, there's still some momentum. And finally, number 1, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez had a very difficult life growing up, and unfortunately this led to him living a life committing a plethora of horrible crimes throughout South America during the 1970s. Now by the time the 80s had rolled around, he had made a mistake during one of these awful crimes, and this led to his arrest. Now once in police custody, he spilled everything on basically his entire life and confessed at that point to an insane amount of crimes. Just confessed to everything and just unloaded. Like we're talking confessing to 240 killings on top of the 110 that they already suspected him of doing. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. So at that point they're like, yeah, we believe you, this is horrible. Pedro of course went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994, which is absolutely insane. That's why I had to put him on number 1 here. He was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years, but he was also released from there for good behavior. That's horrible.
Number 10, the young czar. Being the leader of a nation is hard. I play a lot of city builders, trust me, I know. Being the leader of a nation whose people have been brutally oppressed by your family's dynasty for 300 years and in general living in very poor conditions, especially compared to the rest of the world, that's hard too. Even harder. Nicholas II inherited the throne from his father, which sounds great, but in reality was a lot of pressure to do so. As it turns out, Russia was in need of drastic change, and they would get it from the people and a bald man with very pointy facial hair. A communist revolution saw the Empire of Russia fall. 300 years of Romanov rule end overnight, as the Tsar was forced to abdicate his throne. So what's his crime? Well, not doing anything. Negligence. He did so much nothing that people had to do something. Number 9, Nero's steam. We've talked about Emperor Nero quite a lot on this channel, but that's because he's the down bad Roman emperor who puts opulence in Pax Romana. It's hard to pinpoint an exact crime or moment from him, as he's the guy you think about when you think of Roman emperors. However, his crimes against his wife Claudia Octavia are very notable. So when Nero was getting remarried, he had to get rid of Octavia. I mean, you can't have like 40 wives. That's you gotta get rid of her. But how? I mean, how do you get rid of a woman like that? He actually did the whole James Bond villain thing where the victim gets placed into a trap. It's very crude, but theatrical, because remember, theatrics are important. Remember that, folks. Hence, Octavia was banished to an island where shortly after she was locked into a vapor bath, where she suffocated. Naturally, to make himself look better, they made it look like she did it, not him. So yeah, what a great guy. What an absolute hero in that story. Definitely not a villain. Number 8, Afzal Khan. Everyone remembers King Henry VIII for doing what he did to his wives. A Nazi, slap on the wrist, Nazi, don't do that, for shame. However, I would like to offer Afzal Khan as the alternative monster here. He didn't unalive a handful of wives like Henry, no. He actually managed to rack up a count of 63. Yep, you heard me right, 63. First off, I don't know how you have that many wives and or remember names, let alone birthdays and anniversaries. I would not do very well in that situation. Well, what's the reason for all this blood spilling? It's pretty horrible, actually. Simply because he was being invaded, and the guy who was invading him and winning was slightly nicer to women and was going to most likely give them a better life. Jeez, talk about if I can't have it, no one can. God. Number 7, Caligula's wife. I think in a healthy relationship, you ought to put your partner on a pedestal. Maybe your partner is drop dead gorgeous, a promising athlete, or really enjoys building Legos. Nice TIE fighter, babe, way to go. Yeah. Emperor Caligula of Rome liked to put his wife on a pedestal, literally. And while on this pedestal, she was wearing nothing but her birthday suit. Oh boy. Well, all of his friends, politicians, generals got to gawk and stare at her, and in some weird goth power flex, he would oftentimes hold a knife to her and tell her that he could just end her life whenever he wanted because he can do that. Not to mention the guy had a complete narcissist complex, building statues of himself everywhere just so she can like, oh great, there he is again, it's him again. Number 6, Genghis Khan. I bring the man up again because he's responsible for so much loss, so much blood spill, so much pain. Sure, they were effective warriors and archers, but they were brutal, dude, especially him. They took what they wanted when they wanted, and it's said that he was responsible for so many lives lost that it affected the carbon footprint of the planet. Dude, that's insane. That is literally insane. Also to note his treatment of rather, mistreatment of women. YouTube won't let me say much, but I can tell you that these ladies were not inviting him into their bedrooms. It wasn't good. As it stands today, because of his bedroom misconduct, his DNA still lives on. 5% of men worldwide share his DNA.
Since we're talking historical crime, let's throw it back to the 18th century for Nathan Elgin, the servant girl annihilator. Now over 130 years in the past, few official records pertaining to the victims have survived, and the same can be said for Nathan Elgin, the proven yet unproven perpetrator. In July of 1884, there were 2 instances of women, both African American, being stabbed in the face as they slept. They both survived, and authorities investigated as separate incidents. In 1884, an African American woman is then struck in the head with a smoothing iron while she sleeps. She also survives. These nocturnal attacks, not fatal, were idiosyncratic in style that they must have been the beginning of a killer who would later escalate to more gruesome results. And that is the case. In 1884, they escalate again. The first one is simply an assault overnight, but literally the next day, an African American woman named Molly Smith is struck in the head with an axe. Molly Smith set a pattern for all that followed in 1885, as 8 killings took place in Austin, Texas, all carried out pretty much the same way. And the axe would always be left behind, and the bare footprints of the killer, who was missing a toe on one foot, was always on the scene. Meanwhile, Elgin had been getting in trouble since 1881, inciting attacks and carrying weapons, so when the police find him attacking a woman in 1886 Masontown, Austin, they're pretty okay with the fact they had to pop one in him to get him to stop. But the officer's shot didn't kill Elgin instantly. It did leave him paralyzed and mortally wounded, and he died the next day. And a subsequent autopsy revealed that the bullet had gotten lodged in Elgin's spine. Sure, blah blah blah, it doesn't matter. But the doctors also noticed another detail. Elgin was missing a toe on the right foot, and just like that, they'd found their man. Catherine Knight made arrest herstory in Australia as the first woman to be given life imprisonment, no parole. Why? Well, Catherine wasn't a great girlfriend. She started her long line of violent relationships with another co-worker, David Kellett. Knight met Kellett in 1973, and the pair got married the following year, when she tried to strangle him on their wedding night because he only had intercourse with her 3 times before he fell asleep. Then Knight was in a relationship with David Saunders, and after meeting in 1986, he doesn't marry her, which means he's in for a treat of her insanity. She cuts his dog's throat in front of him. She knocks him unconscious with a frying pan, burns his face with an iron, stabs him in the stomach with a pair of scissors. He finally leaves her and goes into hiding, and then she meets minor John Price in 1994. They're turbulent as hell and really hit a high note in 98 when the pair got in a massive arguments because Price didn't want to get married. Pissed, Knight videotaped a bunch of medical kits he had apparently stolen from work and sent the video to his boss. Price was fired from the job he had for 17 years. And yet somehow the final straw is only when she stabs him in the chest in the year 2000. On February 29th of the same year, he went to the magistrate's court on the way to work and took out a restraining order against her. He told his co-workers afterwards that if he didn't show up to work the following day, it's because she had killed him. Well, that same day, that night, Kathy, after the 2 of them bang one out and John falls asleep, attacks John Price, and after 37 stabs, he dies. She then skins him, hangs it from hooks around the house, and in the kitchen, police later discover baked potatoes and a pumpkin in the oven and a still warm pot with Price's head floating in it with zucchini and cabbage on the stove. Police had intervened, thankfully, before the children had gotten home from school, as Price's boss had called the police when he no-showed at work. In Australian first for women, Knight was sentenced to life in prison without parole at her trial in 2001. She may be known as Cannibal Kathy or Australia's Hannibal Lecter, but Knight has a good reputation in her correctional facility, affectionately nicknamed Nana for her maternal tenderness. It doesn't even feel like it could be real, but it is. Nazino Island cannibal hell. In the summer of 1933, thousands of Moscow citizens are rounded up by police and sent to live on a small, swampy island in Siberia, Ob's River. They were unwilling, unknowing settlers in Stalin's new social engineering plan to relocate millions of undesirables into remote areas where they would cultivate the land and develop self-sufficient communities. Like, they would undoubtedly die, but hopefully they'd build some towns first. The first 3,000 arrived by barge on Nazino Island in May of 1933. They had no tools, food, or shelter, and conditions deteriorated quickly with snow, frost, and rain. Still, more people kept arriving. Guards patrolled to pop anyone who tried to escape, and they distribute rye bread flour every 4 to 5 days, which people would mix with water and then eat, or simply inhale and risk suffocating on. But the most troubling was what the many island's inhabitants resorted to when starvation really set in. A woman from the island was being transferred to another camp and was brought to stay the night at the home of Theophila Berlin, who said in an interview the woman's calves had been cut off. When he inquired what happened, she said, "They did that to me on the island of death. They cooked them off and they cooked them." When asked if he ate human meat, one island prisoner told interrogators, "That's not true. I only ate livers and hearts," describing the process of making skewers or picking who to take from, those already close to gone. Island, there was a guard, they were killing each other. On the island, there's a guard named Kostya Vennikov, a young man, and he fell in love with a girl who had been sent there. He was courting her, protecting her, and one day he had to go away for a while, and he left her with his comrades to take care of her. But with all the people there, the comrades couldn't really do much. People caught the girl, tied her to a poplar tree, and cut off pretty much everything they could. When Kostya came back, she was still alive, and he tried to save her, but she'd lost too much blood. August 1933. The island's empty once more. It was evacuated just 13 weeks after the first colonialists arrived. And of the 6,700 prisoners brought there, 4,000 were missing or dead.
Number 10. Boudica. She was very tall, the glance of her eye most fierce, her voice harsh. A great mass of the reddest hair fell down to her hips. Her appearance was terrifying. Sounds awesome to me. One of the most famous queens in British history, Queen Boudica was originally co-ruler of the Iceni tribe of East Anglia alongside her husband King Prasutagus. That is, she was until the Roman governor of Britain at the time attacked. Prasutagus was killed and his lands and household were plundered by the Romans. Boudica and her daughters were rather savagely treated as well. So much so that after the fact she rose up, leading other tribes of Britons who banded together and decided to take the fight back to the Romans. The Britons captured the Roman settlement of modern-day Colchester, with the imperial agent fleeing to Gaul. They fought to London and to St. Albans, storming the cities and sending the defenders fleeing. The Britons desecrated the Roman cemeteries, mutilating statues and breaking tombstones. The Roman governor of Britain at the time, who had fled with his troops into the safety of the Roman military zone, challenged Boudica with an army of 10,000 regulars and auxiliaries. "Win the battle or perish, that is what I, a woman, will do. You men can live on in slavery if that's what you want." It's a pretty good quote. The battle was a brutal defeat though, with Boudica taking poison to avoid becoming a prisoner. Criminal to the Romans, but I mean, a hero to pretty much everyone else. Number 9. Nefertiti. Kind of hard to call this a crime, but basically Nefertiti was the wife of the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep IV. Being close to equal in power to her husband, as well as very influential in her own right, she and her husband did something quite scandalous. They decided to turn their backs on almost the entire pantheon of Egyptian gods. Sort of. They made one god the prime god of Egyptian religion during their reign. That would be the god of the sun, Aten. They moved the capital of Egypt to a new location, which they named after Aten, and they even both changed their names. He became Akhenaten, and she became, give me a sec here, Nefertiti. There's like a hyphen in there, I don't know. Both of those names, as you may have noticed, have the name Aten in them. Nobody liked this change, and it was quickly reverted after they were no longer in power. Sure was scandalous though. Number 8. Anne Boleyn. Honestly, for most of the wives of Henry VIII, it's a little hard to well, one, pick one, but also two, really know if any of the things they were accused of actually happened or if they were just easy excuses. But nonetheless, here we are, and since we haven't talked about any before, why not start with the second one, who was pretty much the catalyst for Henry VIII and England breaking away from the Roman Catholic Church and forming a whole new church, resulting in the deaths of an eventual thousands of people. You see, divorce is strictly prohibited in the Roman Catholic Church, so when Henry met Anne, his wife Catherine, who had not produced him a son to carry his name, just kinda had to go, prompting the whole damn Reformation. Was it worth it? No, because the marriage lasted 3 years before she was charged with infidelity and incest, and lost her head. I kinda feel bad for anyone associated with King Henry VIII though. Number 7, Queen Dida. Queen Dida of Kashmir was quite an ambitious queen mother. Dida seized complete administrative control during her husband's reign, ultimately becoming queen regent for her son and grandsons. That ain't enough for Miss Dida here. Mere advisory for her? No sir, she despised being just an advisor, and well, she disposed of all 3 of her grandsons using medieval forms of witchcraft and torture. Yikes. How dare they make Gma their advisor? Queen Dida got what she wanted at least, as she then reigned as monarch for 23 years, being in some form of power for nearly the whole of Kashmir's 10th century. And while she may have been more than a little brutal, she was honestly one of the best and strongest rulers Kashmir has ever had. Number 6, Queen Nandi. Queen Nandi of the Zulu Empire has a story that literally sounds like it's straight out of a movie. Before the Zulu Empire ever came to become a thing at all, Nandi was impregnated by a Zulu chief in the 1700s, giving birth to a son they named Shaka. But being the 3rd wife of the chief, she and her son were often ridiculed and shamed by other chieftains. Despite all that, Nandi raised Shaka to be an extremely fierce warrior. Shaka grew up to become the Zulu chief in 1815, and Nandi became the queen mother alongside him, known in English as the Great She-Elephant. She, alongside her son, wreaked havoc on those who had mistreated her and Shaka. But since Shaka remained unmarried, it was Nandi who, funnily enough, remained the power behind the throne of the Zulu Empire throughout her lifetime. She is the reason the empire ever existed in the first place, and if any of what she did was a crime, I kinda get it.
Number 5, Heretic's Fork. Yeah, a lot like this. This one sucked. The medieval Heretic's Fork was a device used during the Inquisition to punish individuals accused of heresy. You hear the wrong stuff and then you say the wrong stuff, no matter what you do, bad punishment awaits. Some forks going in a place you don't want it to be. This punishment consisted of a long metal fork with 2 prongs that were placed under the chin and the sternum of the accused, making it so you had to stay upright or else, yeah, not good. The device was designed to keep the person awake and prevent them from speaking and or swallowing, and if they do so, it would cause extreme pain. The prongs here could be adjusted to vary the amount of pressure applied, and the device was often left in place for hours or, again, like the other punishment, even days at a time, which is horrible. The Heretic's Fork was cruel, and it was a form of psychological punishment that was used to extract confessions and punish those who dared to speak out against the church. Yes, how dare thee? Now hold still. Number 4, sewer surfing. It's not as cool as you're imagining, but it's something along those lines. Also known as sewer hunting and or draining, sewer surfing was a popular but illegal activity during the Dark Ages and involved navigating through the underground sewage systems of cities, typically for thievery or other illicit activities, trying to find some gold, something, I don't know, something shady going on under the city. Sewer surfing was often punished severely, more than you'd think here. Guys going through garbage, they're like, hang him. It's like, what? It was also considered a violation of the law and a danger to public health. You go down there, you come back up with, I don't know, a plague that you found down there. You don't want that. You don't want a rat to bite you. Offenders would face fines, imprisonment, or even the gallows. However, despite the risks and penalties, many people continued to participate in this dangerous activity, as it was their only means of survival or adventure, or money or goods or anything really. It led to numerous arrests and punishments throughout the medieval period. Honestly, fair, I don't know, you never know. Somebody may have lost a nice pocket watch, or maybe you'll find rats and then get really sick. 50-50. I found a pocket watch, and also the town is violently ill, so I'm rich, sorry. Number 3, Blasphemy. Blasphemy! You almost have to yell it every time you say it, you know? Blasphemy was considered a serious crime in medieval times. It involved speaking ill or speaking contemptuously about God, Jesus, and or the church. That's a big no-no back then. Big no-no. This was seen as a direct attack to God and the faith. It was considered a threat to the very fabric of society just because you said some shit. Blasphemers could be punished in various ways. At this point, you probably know them. Imprisonment, flogging, and or, well, yeah, just you're dead now. In some cases, offenders were forced to wear a blasphemer's bridle, which was a metal mask with a spike that was inserted into the offender's mouth, which would of course prevent them from speaking more. Blasphemy laws varied across different regions and periods throughout medieval European history, but they all shared a common goal of protecting the sanity of religious beliefs and shoving metal into a human's mouth. All those things were very important to the faith. It's good stuff. Number 2, beard tax. I tried to grow a beard for like 2 weeks, and I just immediately bailed on the whole thing. I was like, hey, you'll see me guys, I'll show you. And then I came back, didn't even talk about it. In medieval times, I would have been fine, honestly. It's a weird tax. There were periods and regions in medieval history where facial hair was regulated and or frowned upon. Imagine that, right? Guys trying to grow it out, has a little stubble. Everyone's like, ugh. Really, Alexander the 7th, really? During the reign of Henry VIII in England, a beard tax, cha-ching, was imposed to, well, only men with beards over 2 weeks old. They were required to pay. If you were day 13, they're like, all right, we'll see you tomorrow. You better figure this whole thing out, mister. Vikings, however, what about them? In the Dark Ages, Vikings, they were all about the beards. What happened? Beards, when it came to Vikings, they were highly valued and considered a sign of masculinity and strength. Again, I'd be screwed if it was that time. I'd be good over here, but then I'm a very weak man over here, you know what I mean? No tax and then no muscle. Taylor McWaters, no tax and no muscle. And finally, number 1, not reporting a dead body. Yeah, we've all seen Stand By Me. This can lead to some problems, some troublesome things. This last one here is pretty obvious in theory, but the way that they handled it back then was pretty crazy. We're not doing it the same today. Thank God. Thank the church and the lords. In medieval times, roughly around 1240, the law surrounding the discovery of a dead body, surprise, what's this? Who is this? This varied depending on the region and the time period. But generally, if somebody discovered a, who is this skeleton? What's this? Generally, at that time, they were required to report it to the courts or the lords. The lords, you know the lords? Go tell the lords. Failure to do so could result in punishment, as of course, it was considered suspicious behavior. Fair, okay, fair. More often than not, the person who found the body, they would be asked to provide information about the circumstances surrounding the death, including any and all possible suspects. Yeah, so take a guess. He had wood teeth, he looked old and medieval, I don't know, he was someone. In some cases, the finder may have been entitled to a reward for discovering the body, but in other cases, you yourself could be charged with the death. So, 50-50, might get some money, might go to jail. If that was me, I'd be like, nope, I didn't see a thing, sir. I was just looking up at space, wondering what that big rock in the sky is. I don't know what gravity is. All women are witches, right, brother? Cheers. Didn't see anything.
Number 10. Queen of hating her daughter. Starting off this list with a bang would have to be the utterly despicable Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg, the Queen of Sweden. Queen Maria here seems to be guilty of the crime of attempted delifing. That's a pretty crazy thing for a queen, but it gets even crazier when you find out it was her own daughter who she tried to do this to. For some reason, when the queen gave birth to her daughter, who she wanted to be a son, she instantly thought of her sweet, innocent little daughter as a dark and ugly monster with black eyes. Gotta love coming into this world and being hated purely for existing. As she saw her as a monster, Maria tried to have her daughter dispatched multiple times, and I don't know what this crime would be called, but she even forced her daughter to sleep next to the rotting corpse of her own father. Maybe that's the true crime here, because this is messed up. Number 9. Don't mess with the Empress. The only powerful female emperor in the history of China has got to make you extremely ruthless, simply because you are a target and you would have needed to work to get to where you are. And you know what? Wu Zetian, who ruled during China's Tang Dynasty, was quite ruthless. She took her position of power by force, and she slayed many people in order to do so. But she didn't stop there. She committed more acts of slaying throughout her rule as well. And I don't mean like slay queen, although that does really work for this list, but no, she slayed people. And we don't support that kind of criminal behavior, even if you are above the law. To make matters worse though, it is reported that even her mother and grandchildren fell onto that list of victims, all because they were against her. Truly a ruthless queen. Number 8. Mommy issues. Empress Irene of Athens ruled between 797 to 802, and she co-ruled with her son for 2 decades before leaving it all by herself. That's not a crime, but how she did so was a bit more, I don't know, just a little outside the realm of legality by today's standards. Her son, Emperor Constantine VI, was not a popular emperor, and the empress was quite an ambitious and greedy woman. She wanted full control of the Byzantine Empire, and to do that, with the help of some political allies, Irene led a conspiracy against her own son. Poor parenting skills if you ask me, but hey, the two actually made up and were at least somewhat civil. That is until Constantine divorced his wife and married his mistress, turning the people against him and giving Irene the opportunity to lead another conspiracy and then have her son's eyes gouged out. Yay! Number 7. Ranavalona. I honestly didn't know Madagascar had queens or kings. That's not because it doesn't make sense, I'm just dumb. Thanks to me being a young child, I thought the only royalty Madagascar had was King Julian, you know, like the lemur. King Julian! Like that King Julian. But they did have kings and queens, and one of these queens was pretty damn brutal. Queen Ranavalona I ruled Madagascar between 1828 and 1861, and there is absolutely no doubt that she would do anything for her kingdom. After King Radama I, her husband, passed away, she took over the crown, and during her reign, she put a lot of people to the axe, or whatever way they executed people in Madagascar. Her uncle was one who met the sticky end to protect her power. But some records state that Ranavalona ended her own mother's life by subjecting her to starvation. Ranavalona sent her mom to her room and didn't let her have dinner. Or any meals, really. That's never okay, and would get someone like us charged under the law with something. I don't know what exactly it would be, but it'd be something. Number 6. Pretty firmly against cheating. Not to be weird, but I can kind of see where this queen is coming from. At first I sort of get it, but not later on, just at first. Henry II of France had a lifelong affair with his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, and even while on his deathbed, he begged his own wife, Queen Catherine de Medici, to allow him to see her. Kind of really disrespectful to your wife, but I guess he loved his mistress too. I'm kind of confused on the morals of this. However, the queen was not confused on the morals and didn't give in to his plea. In fact, she even denied Diane entry into the room, letting the king pass away without having his dying wish granted. Damn. That ain't a crime. This queen had a daughter who took after her dear old dad when it came to the whole monogamous relationships, meaning she didn't really have them. When the queen mother found out about her married daughter's new romantic interest, she locked her daughter up in a castle and never saw her again. But she became even worse when she ordered her daughter's romantic interest to be executed in front of her. Now that is rough. And while she didn't do the deed herself, giving the order is kind of bad enough. It gets worse. Her son, King Henry, didn't like that she cruelly did this to her own daughter, so she had him dispatched as well. My goodness.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Stephen Griffiths. This is a person who is said to have idolized the Yorkshire Ripper, so I'm sure what comes next will be no surprise. Stephen was a PhD student who wanted to achieve fame, but through the most sinister way possible. Between June of 2009 and May of 2010, he would go on to take the lives of 3 separate women. His criminal history was also extremely concerning, as years ago, he had been arrested due to an unprovoked attack on a grocery store manager, and it is said that he previously stated that he saw himself becoming a serial killer. Shortly after he was arrested for his crimes, CCTV footage emerged that showed him celebrating after taking the life of his final victim. The footage showed him holding up a crossbow and giving the finger directly to the camera. It is said that Stephen pled guilty to his crimes once caught, not because he was remorseful, but because he wanted to receive the recognition for them. In our number 4 spot today, we have Joanna Denny. This is the person responsible for a series of killings and attacks that took place in March of 2013. Joanna is a very cold and very heartless person and has on many occasions been said to laugh at her crimes and the lives she took, even still behind bars. After the first of her crimes, authorities launched a manhunt for her and they used CCTV footage to help track her down. She was finally caught after attacking 2 dog walkers who, thanks to immediate medical intervention, were able to survive. There are many things about this story that make it exceptionally chilling, and it seems as though most people Joanna encounters are left with quite an impression of what a horrible person she really is. On the day she was sentenced, it is reported that the judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, said, quote, "Although you pleaded guilty, you've made it quite clear you have no remorse." He went on to say, quote, "You are a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer." After this, he sentenced her to a whole life order, or life in prison without parole, and it is said that she smiled and laughed at this. Since her time in prison, she is said to have planned escape attempts that involved the killing of a prison guard and other terrifying ideas. In our number 3 spot today, we have Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Elizabeth is a former registered nurse and serial who is responsible for taking the lives of 8 and attempting to take the lives of another 6 senior citizens who were under her care. With a total of 14 victims that either passed away or were harmed by her actions, she is now one of the worst serial killers Canada has ever seen. And not to mention how she was doing these things to vulnerable people that she was supposed to have devoted her life to taking care of. Her first victim who passed away was James Silcox, who was 84 in 2007 and was a World War II veteran. She committed her crimes by injecting insulin into her patients. In September of 2016, Liz ended up entering herself into a drug rehabilitation program at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is located here in Toronto. It was here that she ended up confessing to her horrific crimes. Of course, the staff at the hospital notified the proper authorities, and she was subsequently arrested, and she gave police a 2-hour confession. She admitted to knowing what she did was wrong, but she also just said that she had urges she couldn't control. She stated that, quote, "God or the devil or whatever wanted me to do it." In the end, she was sentenced to life in prison, but because of the way that the Canadian system works, she will at some point be eligible for parole, and hopefully denied, alright? In our number 2 spot today, we have Kevin Davis. The story behind this killer is truly one of the most disturbing things I have ever heard in my entire life. Kevin Davis was 18 years old when he took the life of his own mother. It seems as though there was some sort of conversation beforehand that had made him upset, which of course is never a good enough reason to do something like this, but there are details about this crime I wish that I could just unlearn. In an interview with police, he gives them an extremely detailed account of basically everything that happened and seems to show absolutely no remorse at all. It is chilling, it is disgusting, and it is honestly just horrific. During his trial, a doctor did testify to say that he had a personality disorder, but that he also fully knew the difference between right and wrong and knew that his crime was wrong and that there were no medical diagnosis that could justify his actions. Kevin is still in jail where he will most likely spend the rest of his life, but he will become eligible for parole in 2044. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Axeman of New Orleans. Unfortunately, this is not the name of some terrible horror flick, and instead it's the moniker given to a terrible, unidentified serial killer. This person was active in New Orleans, Louisiana, and its surrounding areas from May of 1918 to October 1919. As the name implies, those who were targeted by this person were usually attacked with an axe, and it usually was one that actually belonged to the victims themselves. Many people believe that this person may have been targeting people of Italian descent because this was a theme among the victims, and some also believe that he was mainly targeting women and only took the lives of men when they tried to intervene. This is actually somewhat supported by the homes where women were killed but men weren't. In the end, although this person is responsible for taking at least 12 lives, exactly who the Axeman is or was remains a mystery.
Off ominous. Our first killer has no name as he's never been caught. It's the Monster of Florence. The Monster of Florence is nameless and faceless, uncaught, and responsible for 16 graphic deaths between 1974 and 85. MO for target was always consistent, a couple evidently engaged in what writer Douglas Preston called a national pastime in Italy, boinking in parked cars, since traditional Italians do live at home until they're married and Nona doesn't need to hear that. In 1981, crime correspondent Mario Spezzi started reporting on a death. He soon came to believe, like many, that the crime was just one in a series. Spezzi even came up with the name Il Monstro di Firenze, or the Monster of Florence, because giving them a nickname is step one, I guess. The only interaction the killer ever made with police was is when one of the victims escapes, only after her partner is killed because she reverses the car and slams on the gas, propelling herself backwards into a ditch and catching a motorcyclist's attention, who believes he's witnessing a crash and not a current killing, and stops to help, scaring the monster away before he performs his usual mutilations and finishes his victims. While the female victim does pass from her injuries later, the chief inspector lies to media saying that she regained consciousness before passing and told them some info in an attempt to get the killer to expose himself. On the afternoon following the statement's publication, a Red Cross emergency worker who had accompanied the police to the hospital was called by a man who claimed to be the killer and asked what the victim had said. The same emergency worker is later called again by the killer while on vacation in Rimini. The second call left the investigators baffled how the caller knew how to reach the man. There is so much to cover with this case, including the Sardinian connection theory, the multiple men who went to jail and were released for this crime, and the fact nobody's ever been caught. But I got more to talk about, so let's move on to Maria del Carmen and getting head. Imagine your 61-year-old neighbor comes banging on your door, and when you open it, she's carrying a black and red leather box and asks you if she can store it at your place because it's, quote, full of adult toys. Why? Her husband Jesus has disappeared and the police need to look for clues. Last thing she wanted as an elderly woman was the embarrassment of them opening that box, right? Neighbor's super chill and sweet, says sure, even though it's weird as hell, and proceeds to have the box in her house for a while before it starts to smell because a summer's gone by. Which is the last thing you want from a box of adult toys that aren't yours stored in your house by an old lady. So the neighbor finally decides to look inside, and it's insta regret. Amongst the Vibies and the blow-up dolls was the rotting, boiled head of her neighbor's husband wrapped in tinfoil, which apparently sent her into a full-scale panic attack. Baby girl, I do not blame you. Jesus' relatives said they were always skeptical about Maria's claim that her husband went on vacation by himself and then broke his phone by dropping it in the bathtub. They later got text messages from different numbers, but didn't believe they were coming from the missing man. Their efforts to communicate with him verbally were also all unsuccessful. Anyone who's seen Catfish once can see through that. Maria did end up in jail. This may be the scariest on the list because it was the most preventable, failing Esmond Green. What would you do if someone walked into your hospital and collapsed on the waiting room floor? Yeah, I'd help them too. We all like to think that we would, that anyone would, but apparently employees of Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn didn't share this belief. After checking into Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, Esmond Green waited 24 hours for treatment. EMS workers had brought her to the center on the morning of June 18th. The hospital had said she was suffering from agitation and psychosis and was involuntarily admitted after refusing medical review for her diagnosed schizophrenia. At 5:32 a.m., Esmond Green collapsed out of her chair and onto the floor convulsing. In some truly horrible camera footage, you see several patients and even nurses walk by without stopping to see what's happening. She stops moving at 6:07 a.m. Two security guards and a member of hospital medical staff can be seen on video stopping to look at Green briefly before just walking away. Close to 7 a.m., finally a nurse comes over, nudges her with her foot, then again, then checks her pulse. Then the nurse calls for help. The hospital later tries to falsify medical records to make it seem as though she'd been without assistance for just 10 minutes. 4 security cameras tell a different story, and the hospital fired 6 employees after their investigation. But yeah, before you ask, that lawsuit went absolutely crazy against that hospital. You can't just sleep or eat at anyone's house. My mom was sure to teach me that. People like Carl Tanzler are good reminders, since there was a body in his bed. Carl Tanzler was a radiology technologist at the hospital in Florida. In 1930, he met Elena Milgro de Hoyos, who was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Tanzler became obsessed with Elena and saving her, reportedly showering her with gifts, and told her that he loved her always. However, Elena made it clear she wasn't really interested, and although he wasn't actually a doctor, with her family's approval he tried out different remedies. But she dies anyway in 1931. Tanzler insists on paying for her funeral, complete with a large mausoleum. Her family consented, but they weren't aware that Tanzler alone would have a key to the mausoleum. He visits constantly, leaving gifts, installing a phone so he can talk to her through the wall, normal stuff. 2 years later, Tanzler removes Elena's body from the cemetery. He tries to preserve it by attaching her bones together with wire, placing wax-coated cloth over her skin, and sticking rags in her body to help keep its shape. He was seen purchasing women's clothing and perfumes. A young neighbor saw him dancing with what appeared to be a life-size doll through the window. And then he stopped visiting Elena's grave, too. Rumors spread that Tanzler was living with a corpse. And in 1940, those rumors reached Elena's sister, who goes there and confronts him with the whole sleeping with the disinterred body of my sister thing, and he happily shows her. Tanzler was deemed fit to stand trial after a psychiatric evaluation and charged with destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. However, the charges are dropped because the statute of limitations expired. An insult to effing injury, poor Elena's remains, before being laid to rest in an unmarked grave, her modified corpse is put on display at a funeral home where 6,000 people come to see it. Ugh. This guy incites pure rage in me and has from the day I first read this case. It's Xavier Dupont de Ligons, the French F-wit. I can't say it on here, but y'all can say it out loud for yourselves. Has a nice ring to it, especially since this twit is a family annihilator, doing so in the name of money and ego. Xavier is on the run for killing his wife, 4 teens, and 2 dogs at their home L'Oréal Atlantique of Nantes in France before disappearing without a trace in 2011. Xavier worked as a salesman and attempting to create several businesses over the year, all with little success. He owed money. He had been raised affluent, and his wife had too, and they'd spent their lives that way. The entitlement of their regal title inflated them beyond a point of living comfortably within their means, and instead they overextended, aka they were broke. There were so many signs of what was to come too. In July of 2010, Xavier emails friends writing that there might be accidents that happened to his family that he might be blamed for someday. Even if it's convincing, don't believe it. In January 2011, when his father dies, he inherits a .22 cal, and a month later, having never used one, suddenly obtains a license for it. After another month, he begins taking the firearm to a range. He buys a silencer and as well drives hours to buy adhesives and plastic bags. Month after that, he buys cement, a shovel, and quicklime. And what gets a little confusing is between the nights of April 3rd and 5th, he picks off the family members while still going to dinners and movies with other ones. Seeing as everyone was killed execution style, would Agnes or one of the other teens not have heard something when someone else was taken? Between the panic of Agnes's family, a weird letter everyone receives where Xavier claims to be an undercover cop, and countless visitors banging on their unanswered door, police are reportedly sent back to this property, and finally Xavier's letter tips them off, his comment to ignore the loose backyard gravel. Under it was his family and 2 dogs. Xavier remains missing to this day.
Number 5, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Does this really need an introduction? That's all anybody's talking about right now. But Johnny Depp, one of America's greatest actors and teenage heartthrob on 21 Jump Street. Am I right, ladies? God, he was cute in that. Amber Heard being some lady who had a breakout role as a fish lady and Aquaman. I haven't seen Aquaman, that's just what it looks like to me. And all of this in one of the messiest divorces ever publicized. Yikes. This trial is happening as I speak. Probably right now. It's happening right now. And we are slowly reaching the outcome. However, all I'll say is when 2 gorgeous millionaires marry each other and you mix in some illicit substances, well, are we really surprised this didn't work out? Johnny Depp we're talking about here. If I ever get rich and famous, I will never treat my loved ones like that, or any of the amazing people that follow me. I love you guys. You're the best. Thanks so much for watching all the time, guys. I love you. And checking me out on my own socials. Oh, shucks. You guys are the best. Number 4, French royalty. Imagine being so down bad with your husband that it starts a revolution and then inspires other European nations to be free from monarchical tyranny. Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI were the last kings and queens of France. If crimes against humanity don't count, then I don't know what does. People had no rights, even less rights than truckers in Ottawa. Oh, that's the worst. It was a very interesting time in history. By the end, the Castile had been sieged, heads were on pikes, and the national razor was brought out just to show how democratic a new government can be. Next time, be sure to share food at the bread table. That's all I gotta say about that. Number 3, Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Talk about scandal. Oh, if we had social media back then, this would have been everywhere. A regular Romeo and Juliet. And a little bit of Bonnie and Clyde too, actually. Cleopatra had a few Roman men wrapped around her finger. It was politics, and she was playing the long game. The star-vexed lovers were playing with two empires, some of the largest at the time. However, their political string pulling and bedsheet wrestling would come to a tragic end. Cleopatra and Mark Antony would never be around to see their empires fall after some betrayal, and both of them having their lives taken away. They did some naughty things in between that though, they weren't very nice. Number 2, Mustache Man and Blonde Lady. Hey, even the biggest, baddest guys in history get lonely. Ava Braun, Mustache Man's main squeeze and wife right up until the Red Army came a-knockin'. Oh boy, they came a-knockin'. We all know what he's guilty of, and honestly, I think she's kinda guilty too. We've all seen the lost German footage of the boys making plans at the Eagle's Nest, and there she is. I'd say that doesn't look too good. I'm not a lawyer, or I am, but it doesn't look too good. It's kind of like if Adam and I were on an episode of Cops, and we got pulled over in a car together. The footage made it to the show, which means there's something in the car. It all depends on who wants to take the blame. Otherwise, you're guilty by association, or an accessory to the fact. So, yeah, I think she is kinda guilty too. Yep. If you weren't guilty, you would've gone down in the bunker with him. You know what I'm saying, Chris? You know what I'm saying? Number 1, Mussolini and partners, because he had more than one. A lot of people think Mustache Man did it on his own, but the truth is he had a lot of help from his fascismo friend in Italy, Mussolini. From organizing his fascist beatdown gangs to the brown shirts and all the war crimes in between, Mussolini had a hand in it. He showed him the way. Mussolini not only did all this while married, but kept the company of unsavory mistresses. It's a good thing he controlled the media because people wanted to say some bad things about him and his most favorite mistress, Claretta. His wife Rachel stayed with him up until the end when him and Claretta were brutally unalived by citizens fed up with his chin, he had a chin thing, and his fascismo government. Multiple crimes against humanity and cheated on his wife. You know, we know you knew better. Come on, let's be honest.
Number 10, trial by jury. The concept of trial by jury can be traced back to ancient Greece and Rome. Don't get me wrong, that's old school. But the first recorded use of a modern jury system, that dates back to the 12th century England. Medieval England, yes, let's get some men in a room and point at witches. Henry II introduced the practice to replace previous methods of trial, which at that point was relying on physical combat or divine intervention, all that kind of like that. Under this new system, a group of 12 men from the community would be chosen to hear evidence and determine the guilt or innocence of said accused. Right? A little better, a little, you know, less witchcraft, more, okay, we're all talking now, we're conversing. This system gradually spread throughout Europe and then beyond, so on and danforth, and it became an important cornerstone of many modern legal systems. Back in the day, this was a noble deed. It was an honor to be part of the jury, you know? Today, not really so much, not the same at all. You're like, what? No, I don't want to do that. It's gonna take so long. It's gonna be like 4 weeks of jury duty. I haven't done it yet. I've just jinxed myself. I'm gonna get called any day now. Don't answer, you know what I mean? Just don't answer your mail, don't look, just avoid it. That's what I do. Number 9, the stocks. All right, relax, stock bros. I'm not talking about those stocks. I'm talking medieval stocks. Those ones are a bit different. Those ones were very bad. Those are all bad. The stocks were a common form of punishment in medieval times. The convicted person's ankles were locked into these wooden boards with holes for their feet and stuff, and their hands were sometimes also restrained. We've seen this before. Usually people are like this. You go to a theme park, you pose with your family in one of these things, you're like, hey, I'm stuck. You're like, get me out, this is scary. They would be left in public spaces like that, such as the marketplace or town square, anywhere public because, why, of course, you know, shame, we gotta shame everyone back then. And if that wasn't bad enough, the accused would then be pelted with food or even physically attacked by the crowd. Imagine that, imagine being so sparse for food and you're like, yeah, let's throw our bread at that guy. It's like, what a waste, we need that. The duration of the punishment, this varied, but it could range from a few hours to several days. Yeah, locked up like this for days at a time. What a joke. It was used for various crimes, theft, drunkenness, and slander, and it was intended to humiliate and shame the offender while also serving as a deterrent to others. Guys like, oh, I'd hate to be that guy over there. Yeah, for sure. All right, let's throw food at him now. Sick. So dumb. So dumb. Number 8, the drunkard's cloak. Yeah, this one's quite funny. Not really, but we'll see. The drunkard's cloak, also known as the barrel or the shaming cloak. Again, shame, big important step back there. This was a humiliating punishment used in medieval times for people who were drunk or disorderly in public. This drunk person, they were forced to wear a large barrel or a cloak made of wood or heavy cloth, something big and obvious with holes cut out for their heads and arms. Like they were a big mascot, a big barrel mascot in medieval times. And sometimes they would have offensive messages or images painted on it. You know what I mean? Like the piece of paper that says kick me. That was like the old school version of that, much worse. The person would then be paraded through town in this garment, this outfit, this big barrel and not fun, often with crowds throwing garbage or food at them. You know, that kind of medieval Game of Thrones stuff. This punishment was intended to publicly shame the person as well, so yeah. Shame, and then we'll go into the rough nitty-gritty stuff at the end here. Number 7, eavesdropping. Eavesdropping back in the day. I mean, today we've all done it, right? We've all listened at some point in our lives to somebody we don't know. Every time I hear somebody in our hallway, in our apartment, I have to look, right? I'm like, who is it? Someone breaking in? But if you did it during the dark ages, if you listened in on a conversation you weren't supposed to hear, well, there were some serious consequences that were waiting for you. Eavesdropping was considered a serious crime back then. That's why they're always whispering in Game of Thrones. Now it makes sense, right? The act of secretly listening in on someone's conversation without their knowledge and or consent, well, this crime was viewed as a breach of privacy and trust. How dare thee? It was often associated with other crimes such as treason or espionage. This was a big bat. Espionage? Are you kidding? Just because you heard someone say something? Get out of here. Punishments here could include fines, public humiliation, classic, imprisonment, or yeah, remember what happened to Littlefinger in Game of Thrones? Not great. There's worse stuff that could be done. Yikes. Horrible. Number 6, specific hunting. Yeah, you gotta be sure which where you throw an arrow back then. In medieval England, the hunting of the king's deer was considered a very serious crime. Yeah, not that deer. That one's fine, but just don't you hit that one. The act of killing or even injuring a deer was punished harshly under the Royal Forest Law, which was enforced by the king's foresters. That'd be a cool job, just rolling through the forest looking for people. The law applied only to the king's forests, which were areas of land set aside specifically for hunting for his food. Violators could be subjected to a variety of punishments, including fines, imprisonments, and even mutilation. Yeah, a little different than public humiliation. It's just mutilation this time. This law was meant to preserve the deer population for the king's personal use and enjoyment, and served as a way for the monarchy to maintain control over the forest and the resources that it provided. So if you want food, go to that forest over there. It's not even a forest, it's like a marsh. It's horrible. It's like 3 frogs left. Good luck.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Lavina Fisher. You may have heard Lavina's name before, and that is because she made American history when she became the first female serial killer in the United States. Wow, what a title. Sure, her parents were proud. Lavina, along with her husband John, were accused of luring travelers into their inn in Charleston, South Carolina during the 19th century and then killing them so that they could take their belongings. The couple were known for their hospitality, and many unsuspecting travelers fell victim to their deadly scheme as a result. Some stories even suggest that they had a trap door in one of the guest rooms that led to a pit where they would dump all of the bodies of their victims. Despite the numerous accusations and suspicions surrounding the Fishers, they were never formally charged with the killing. However, they were eventually caught and convicted for highway robbery and sentenced to hang. In our number 4 spot today, we have Arthur Shawcross. This man is also known as the Genesee River Killer, and his crime spree began in 1972. In trying to navigate these online guidelines, I can't exactly say who he specifically targeted, but what I will say is that while everyone on this list is particularly horrible, Arthur's crimes were some of the worst, if you catch my drift. This story, however, is a little unlike some of the others today, because after the first 2 of his crimes, he was apprehended, but for some insane reason, they allowed him to have a plea bargain where he was allowed to plead guilty to just 1 charge of only manslaughter, for which he served 14 years of his 25-year sentence. In the least surprising turn of events, once he was released on early probation, his real crime spree got started. He would go on to take the lives of 12 women from 1988 to 1989, and thankfully he was finally caught for these crimes and sent right back to prison. Of course, his initial early release was the subject of huge controversy, rightfully so, and Dr. Michael H. Stone, professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, called this early release, quote, one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. In the end, Arthur passed away in prison while serving a 250-year sentence. He passed in 2008 after suffering a heart attack. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Huesong serial killer. This is the name used to describe a notorious unsolved criminal case that occurred in South Korea during the late 1980s. The killer was responsible for taking the lives of at least 10 women in the city of Huesong between 1986 and 1991. The victims were all found, but there was little to no evidence left at the crime scenes. The case was highly publicized and became one of the most infamous serial killer cases in South Korean history. Despite a massive investigation and the arrest of several suspects, including a man who confessed to the crimes, DNA evidence ultimately exonerated all of them. The case remains unsolved to this day, with many theories and speculations surrounding the identity of the killer. The Hwaesong serial killer case sparked significant changes in the way South Korea approaches criminal investigations though, including the establishment of a national DNA database and the implementation of more advanced forensic techniques. In our number 2 spot today we have Franklin Dwayne Alex. Franklin is a man who had quite an insane crime spree that lasted for about 6 months in the 1990s. Although short, it was anything but sweet. The spree started off in August of 1997 in Houston, Texas, and over the course of this spree, Franklin took the lives of at least 3 people. He committed robberies, he harmed people, he attempted to take more lives where thankfully the people survived, he kidnapped people. Literally any serious crime he could commit during those 6 months, he was doing it. In the end, Franklin was caught and put on trial for his crime spree, and he received a sentence of death, which was carried out on March 30th, 2010. Finally, in our number 1 spot today we have Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman. Known as the serial shooters, the crimes these guys committed are definitely on the list of fears I have, which I'm pretty sure spawned from a Criminal Minds episode. These two were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random drive-by shootings. That's the really scary part. The fire thing is also bad, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about completely random violence that absolutely terrifies me. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was found guilty of 80 out of the 87 felony charges that were brought forth, and that was all in one single trial. The charges included the killings and attempted killings he had done, arson, animal cruelty, and the drive-bys. In the end, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Dale sat on death row, he apparently asked to be put to death as soon as possible, and in the end, in 2013, he decided to take his own life. Samuel, however, remains in prison.